Okay, I think.
There we go.
Greetings. Okay.
Greetings, salutations.
Salutation.
Yeah.
Saludos for those who speak Spanish. Okay, and apparently my slideshow, I don't know what they were talking about, but it's not appearing. Yeah, I have slides all prepared. So they said this is how it's done, but I don't see any buttons for slides. Okay, greetings to everyone as well in the chat room. Okay, question, do you know how to add slides?
Yeah, but I wouldn't know. I guess, yeah, anybody in the chat room, do you guys know? I don't know.
No? Okay, well, they'll be ready for next time. I won't take up too much time. Everyone's been waiting about half an hour, pardon that. I actually thought 8 p.m. this time, but I'm so glad you mentioned 6 p.m. this hour, Mountain Time. Okay. And I don't have access to the questions, or do I? Actually, I do on the machine. Okay. So did you want to start with those since you have them? I can see them too, but
Yeah, we can go right in. I know it takes a second for people to log in right now. Anyway, they're kind of
okay.
filing in.
Okay,
Yeah.
so waiting. You normally wait for everyone to get in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing people come in kind of all at once now, but I guess if we're gonna
That's
save
fine.
it, I guess.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
While they're filing in, I will continue to look on the instructions for the slideshow.
All right. Yeah.
There really are no other buttons
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how you would do it. I mean, I'm sure you probably could, but I'm oblivious.
Raw Pagano. I recognize that name. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are no other buttons.
Okay. Yeah. I guess we got like who we got for now, kind of 40 some people. So that's pretty cool. I think, people will probably gradually sneak on in.
Okay, works. All right, we can begin now. And I actually have the questions here. I can listen as you read them.
Okay.
Someone says sent a request to be in your live video. Okay. Would you like to do that first before questions? Or you want
Sure.
to do that or you want to do that afterwards?
It's however you feel. I guess if you want to
Let's do
go
it a
into the
little
question.
different. I think all these people who do broadcasts, they always make people wait. I don't like to have people waiting. So since he requested now, would you like to bring him in now?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that won't cancel you out or me out, will it? If I click.
I think you can have up to 4 people on a live.
Okay, here we go. Pardon, what did I click? Yep, there he is. Go live. I think you're live, Franco, or no?
There you go. There you go.
Greetings.
Great. Okay, and I presume you are going to have some input or questions.
Yes, sir. I am at I forget what you call it, supermarket. What was it that you called it?
Oh, yeah, those places.
Those places, yeah. I'm getting some coconut water, though.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So, it's not a good, perfect time, but I wanted
Okay,
to ask about, I want to say thank you so much for letting me join, first of all.
you're welcome.
About the parasites, like, can you hear me well?
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
coming in loud and clearly, so.
Or
Mhm.
is their job, and Taylor, for you too, I know we've had conferences.
Is
Is
there,
it
ask that
just,
question.
is it just driving you to eat food so that you can get distracted and reincarnate, or like can you have a parasite and be on your purpose as well, or they want to get you off of your purpose, whatever that purpose is, whether it's your passion or music or art or whatever, or is it just food? Like that's parasite, it's just food, or they want to make relationships, ruin relationships. What in specific? Because I'm very confused with people and relationships, and I don't know when a parasite is.
In your question is the answer. You mentioned various things that are part of daily living, or at least part of your life.
Yes, sir.
And in all parts of that, you find parasites, whether you're talking about food or whether you're talking about the other levels of life. You said relationships or people. You said your art or your music. That would be a passion. A passion is involved in your emotions and your physical focus. So in all walks of everything, there is some form of parasite. And how you choose to allow that to distract you or parasites to distract you is how you fortify yourself. If you are not fortified against parasites, yeah, these are insidious types of entities or energies that will use your weaknesses or your lack of knowledge against you in order to maintain and propagate within you and within your world, or divert you to a course unknown, known to them or it, but unknown to you.
Yes, sir. Thank
So
you so much.
parasites are all things and all levels. Which means what? When you look at that and when you take that into consideration, that means that these so-called things, whether ethereal or physical, they're there. They have, yeah, a purpose, obviously. So they are there. We know that there are supposedly microbes in our so-called atmosphere or environments. Therefore, just because we cannot see them does not mean that they do not have an effect nor that they are not there. So on all levels, you have some form of non-mutualistic entity. Mutual, you know what that means. It's working in your favor no matter what. And if something is mutualistic, no matter what you do, it's working towards your benefit. And it might attempt, depending on its logic, depending on its level of intellect, might attempt to push you in a direction that seems incorrect or seems out of place, but it might have your best interest at heart. So that's considered mutualistic. A parasite is very seldom, very rarely, if ever, mutualistic.
Oh, it's
Although,
very rarely. Okay.
yeah,
Pharaoh,
very rarely.
your knowledge
In
is, sorry.
in so-called nature, you have creatures that they either can be parasitic or they can transcend parasitism, and then they become organisms that are not parasites. They're not trying to feed off of something that is alive or take energy from something that is alive. They then become mutualistic. You see this and probably have heard it or read it when you look at moss, certain types of moss. They are not harming the plant, or certain types of fungi. They will not take from the plant anything that will harm it. In fact, they might offer something that helps the plant in times of need.
Yeah. 1 second. I'm very grateful, and I'm so sorry to interrupt you. My phone is about to die. If later on in this live I could join because I have like 2 more questions, that would be greatly appreciated. And I just want to say thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he died.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No worries. And there's someone else. Okay. I don't know how to. Okay.
Next up.
Yes.
Hello.
Okay. Hi.
Hi. All right. So,
What's your name?
my name is Serge. Serge
Sir.
Abreu. Yes, sir.
Okay. There you are.
Yes. All right. You can hear me clearly?
Loudly and clearly.
All right. Thank you, sir. So, my question for you would be, what is the purpose of the parasite, in the sense that if they're trying to suppress knowledge and they're trying to control the people, why is it that they need to use the parasites to control us when they have so many other ways to do it? Like, why is it that they're pushing it so hard?
When if you can clarify that question for everyone else, are you asking that some other force, some person, forces, agency, organization is utilizing parasites to control masses of people? Is that your question? And
Yes.
why are they doing that?
Yes.
Well, think about your question for a minute. Why would, I mean, not that it's not the case, but why would someone utilize a parasite if one is a parasite?
Okay.
You would be working within a network of beings that, yeah, you might clash, you might compete, but you have similar goals, similar interests when it comes to manipulating hosts.
Okay.
But remember, as I mentioned to the gentleman earlier, that parasites are on all levels. Obviously so. You know, when you think about, you have predators on all levels, you have so-called prey on all levels. So on every level, there exists the same thing. You know, for folks who want to get into the as above, so below, as within, so without, it's similar to that. On every level, you have some type of parasite. So there are two-legged bipedal parasites as well as multiform, multicellular, single-cell parasites, and those that would be considered subatomic parasites, obviously so.
Yes. So what would be something that the average person could do in regular society to kind of minimize the parasites that, you know, they eat or they breathe or goes into the water that they drink? Like, how does the average person minimize that?
Well, one way, and listen close to the things that have been mentioned earlier and what you may or may not have heard in recordings, discontinue participation in these worlds around you that include or encompass the worlds you come from. You know, just continuing along the way you have been, and without question, that is continuing parasitic activity. That's why parasites thrive. They know you're going to continue in the footsteps of those that came before you.
Interesting.
No, it's not interesting. It's factual.
Yeah, you're right. I know, yeah. I know, see, probably scratch the beard. He's like, yep. Okay. All right, yeah.
Yeah, I about to say you should just schedule an appointment to talk to Pharoh about that, man. Stuff like that.
Definitely, right? Yep.
Personal stuff.
Yeah, because, like, I've been thinking about that. I'm just like, that's why every day I question why I do what I do, you know? Sometimes I don't really want to do anything, but, like, I do, you know what I mean? That makes any sense? Like, sometimes I really, really what I would like to do is just sit and breathe in the sunlight. Like, that's pretty much it. Everything else just kind of like extra.
Well, it's only extra if it's in service of the empire. And there have been many so-called great books and so-called great people who have mentioned in some way, shape, or form how service to an empire is either not so much beneficial, but mandatory, if not self-sufficient for one's survival. But in every case, in each instance, someone is always saying that you have to give up like some blood to a blood bank, I think there is one saying, give unto Rome or give unto Caesar that which is due. Now, whether or not that was placed in by parasites in order to get you to comply or be complacent or not, it still fits in with the same scenario that you are in an empire and your actions and activities will, no matter what you do, as long as it's in service of the empire, benefit the empire. When it's not in service of the empire, you know it, you sense it, you know that this is truth, this is correct. Therefore, question everything you do, and not just question. You're not going to just sit around and just breathe. The purpose of being in this place is not to just sit and breathe. That's why you're here. We are here to do more than just sit and breathe. Sitting and breathing is perfect. It has its place. Everything has its place, but you are not here to just sit and breathe.
True. That is true. All right. Well, yeah. Well, I'm here to continue listening to this live, and yeah, let's see what we can break down. It's very informative.
Okay. Wonderful.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Do continue.
All right.
If there's someone else who wants to, I don't know how this works, but there we go. Okay.
Hello, hello. How are we doing?
Greetings. How are you?
Greetings, greetings. I'm good. Just got out of work. Thank you for accepting my request. Shoot, I don't even have any questions prepared, but since we're on the parasite topic, what is like the definition of a parasite? Like, what is its purpose?
Parasite in a so-called scientific scenario or definition is any type of so-called life form. Now notice, if you really read, and there are many different definitions, but some will actually use the term life form, which gives you a clue right there to what I'm saying. But they're not just microbes. They're not just small. In fact, it's not just a microbe that is a parasite. You can see this evidenced in so-called nature. There are flowers that grow along trees that look very beautiful, but they're parasites. And so therefore, that is an example. You don't really need to look up a definition to see or to get evidence that parasites exist on every level. Do you think it goes from microscopic and then goes to the flower and stops? There are trees that are parasitic, that look like trees, that have no roots, they don't grow from a root, and they parasite off of hosts. They live off of something that is alive. That would be your basic common modus operandi of a parasite, that it has to, or it chooses to, thrive and live off of something that is alive. You get nothing from something that is in the transition decomposition state other than its transit energy. So depending on the level of intellect or soul and intellect, you can get a lot off of that. Therefore, it's important not to adhere to the so-called burial practices that have been adhered to in this world. And those in the know and those of the so-called elite status know not to be placed in the tombs and things like that, because they know that their transit energy can and is used.
Thank you. Are we like, okay, so like, are we born with parasites, or like we are born with parasites, but due to like our level of eating, like that just like increases them, or like what increases the parasite level that you contain?
What increases your
like the level of parasites you carry? What I'm trying to say.
Okay, that's even clearer. I want to make sure that you clarify for the listeners, or the viewers, whatever. You do increase your number, but not just number, but you increase your level of interaction with parasites as you grow. So it doesn't matter what you do in the sense of so-called eating. When you ingest, for example, the more knowledge you obtain, and not just knowledge, but the knowledge that takes you out of the distraction mode and brings you closer to true purpose. You are now becoming visible or more readily appealable to parasites that want to devour that or thwart that.
Okay. Wow. Oh, okay. So as you increase your physical, spiritual, mental level, they're also looking to feed and ingest on that as well.
Right, so you have power over that if you realize that the more you obtain, the more you must do. You don't, as I mentioned earlier to someone, you don't just sit and breathe.
Breathe, yes.
When you arrive, according to so-called science, they claim you can have upwards of 1,000 parasites. In, you know, between 300 types, not just one type. There's
Yeah.
many types. As I said, parasites are in colonies, and they are faction, so that there's competition between them for not just the host itself or the domination of the host itself, but actually various portions or parts of the host, not just physical parts, obviously. Those that are not in the ethereal realm and those that exist between both ethereal and physical realm compete over such things as your intellect, over your transit energy, as I mentioned before, over your regenerative forces. So they will have access to those energies on a nonstop basis from your time of your so-called development until you know something is not used anymore, or until you transit completely. So you have many so-called species of parasites, and you can think of them as families, elitist families.
Wow. Okay. I'm gonna get like a couple more questions and I don't want to be hogging them all. But is there like anything or like any things to do that like they don't like and that's not gonna anger them and like hurt you, but like get them to maybe like is there anything you can do not to more say get rid of them because you can't just totally get rid of them? I'm hearing, but like things you can do to prevent them from wanting to feed off of you maybe.
Collage. Remember I mentioned to you before I gave you that little scenario about, I said I had watched, I don't know how, but I just, maybe I saw it on television, these people, they call themselves ghost hunters or some paranormal investigators.
Yes.
And I mentioned to you about how inane can you be to walk into a place that, regardless of if it's a joke or a hoax or real, and start setting up cameras, conspicuously setting up cameras. So you're setting up cameras to catch something that you can't see, as if the thing you're trying to catch is at work, it's gone out, or it's at Pizza Hut or somewhere, it's next door. So you're setting up cameras, and then when you come back or when you leave, they come back and your cameras are going to catch it all. If you notice, nothing is ever caught. The thing is this, that is an example of what I'm talking about when it comes to parasites. These folks who, I'm not putting anyone down, I'm just saying it, those things are probably some type of scam, but they're putting up cameras in order to stop, thwart, or prove that these afterlife creatures or beings or poltergeists, whatever, exist. And I'm saying, I said this to Collage, I said, wouldn't it make more sense to walk in as if you were a TV repair person or a plumber, and slyly, inconspicuously set up something that doesn't look like a camera, and don't tell what you're doing, just walk in there and, I'm here to fix the sink. Wouldn't that make more sense if you're trying to catch a so-called ghost? So if you're trying to thwart a parasite, listen to the parable that I just read, that I just spoke. Most parasites are never caught because they know you're never.
So I must deceive.
It's not being deceptive.
Not being deceptive. Okay.
No, it's not being deceptive. Why turn yourself into a liar? You're not doing that. You just, why would you? I'm going to punch you in the face. Okay, we're in a fight, and you just said, I'm going to knock you out. I'm going to kick your this. I'm going to punch you out. Okay, I know exactly what your next moves are, or at least I have an idea because you just told me. So why are you telling these things what you're going to do through not only mainly through your words and deeds? Usually it's the deed that tells or indicates what you're about to do. The level of seriousness, the level of confrontation is what determines the success rate of removing physical parasites, whether it be some type of worm or protozoa. It will determine how successful you are, not only of removing certain numbers of them and of their lack of recidivism. So you don't want them returning. Some you just don't want returning at all, like the worms, obviously. But others, they will have their place and they will stay and they will remain. But you're not going to rid all of them as long as you are in this plane. You can keep them at a level so that they are in that abyss and you maintain control over that abyss.
Ooh, alrighty. Mm. Ooh. I just heard what you just said, 110%, but I'm still not. Okay. It's just like the seriousness, and you just have to go at it and not speak about it.
Well,
I would just suggest, I mean,
go ahead.
I was just saying, I would just suggest that he contact you personally,
Most
because
definitely,
it's, you know, because I mean, it's a process, you know,
yes,
as far as
indeed.
getting rid of, like you said, it's like all levels of parasites. It's not just like
One,
one mechanical cleanse is going to get it done. It's like,
most
it's like a
definitely,
holistic approach. They got to
most
change your
definitely.
whole life.
Whole life, indeed.
Right.
Do
You
either one
approach it.
of you still not? Still encounter them? I would say not struggle with them, but like you. I mean, because you all are on this path and you all have this knowledge, so therefore, I assume you take steps to rid of them. How would you say you all are on a parasitic level?
You have to clarify that question. How are we all on a parasitic level?
No, how like the two of you, like the two of you have this knowledge. Like, where is your parasitic level at? Like, I know, like I can't, like I'm not saying like I have a shit ton of parasites, but I know that I haven't taken steps to get rid of my parasites. So therefore, I know that they're definitely in there more so than you would have them because you
Well,
have the knowledge.
you exist in a place that is, unfortunately, or whatever, corrupted.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, this is a nonstop thing. You don't stop bathing. You
Mm,
continue. You continue
mm,
to clean. Cleansing is part of being here. If you were to read some text on, and I mentioned this before, I think, and I'm sure I did, that certain schools of thought, certain scientific schools of thought in biology, claim that diversity is as a result of viruses and even parasites to an extent, supposedly, allegedly. But what I glean from that is that these life forms exist and will exist, but we exist as well. But as the hierarchy goes, we have a purpose that transcends their purpose. Therefore, you realize their presence, but you cannot live or put your thought process in a panacea world. You cannot blind yourself to this. The old idiom or adage, rose-colored glasses don't fit in this place. I made that up. They don't fit. You can try to make them fit. That's to your detriment. That's a delusion. You see that in so-called society today, people trying to force an illusion into the world. It doesn't work. You have to succumb to your own forces of insanity in order to say that something that isn't a reality is a reality, and one reality is this. Parasites are all over the place. And you should know that, and you do know that. Therefore, you take measures to protect it.
Wow. 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 Very. Thank you very much. Wow. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
mean, I
Thank
want
you.
to keep asking questions, but I definitely know I should let someone else ask some questions. But yes, thank you very much. Peace, love, and blessings. And
Likewise.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You're welcome. Oh, someone else. Okay. I think I want to give Collage a time to speak, so I'll
I
take.
mean, if you want to do questions, I mean, you can put the next person on. It's however you want to play it. I mean, it's however you want
Okay. I think is the next person there? I don't know.
Hey guys, hi everyone on the live. Thanks for hosting this. This is awesome. I got a question about deja vu. I've been
Okay. How
having.
awesome. Is that your name?
Sorry,
You said this is awesome. Is that your name?
my name's Liam.
Liam. Oh, okay. Greetings, Liam.
So I just wanted to ask about deja vu, and I've been having like really extreme deja vu basically every day, and I've sort of like when I have a tough day, I'll think about this one dream that I had where I was just in a really good place and everything was great and I was much older. And I think that's me in the future. Uh, and you know, I've had these dreams before and they've come true. So can you explain that to me? Like, am I creating the future? Am I seeing the future? What is that?
You're definitely making a difference in your future. That's part of the process of being here. You're supposed to do that. And if you want to make those projections a reality, then it's really not a so-called deja vu moment at all. These are dreams, and as you know, or should know, that dreams are a paradigm or paradox of what is and what isn't all at the same time. Therefore, something that you see that's a portend of something that has not occurred but then occurs, and you recall that, that in itself is a lesson just in the recall. You're having recall, you should have that recall, it should be strong. But in the recall, it's also showing you that you are manifesting what you want to occur. This can also be seen in the so-called negative sense, and you might have read or heard this spoken in terms of projecting a negative on your own world. So to an extent that does have credence, you can project the negative on your own world. However, I am of the nature that says that's minimal. You'd have to do a lot more physical things to project negative onto your world. Because for that to be legit would be to legitimize poverty and legitimize all the things that you may not experience in your world, but others do experience, to say that they must be projecting negative through their reality, to their reality, through their dreams and desires. And I know, and you know, that that's not the case. It takes a lot to create that type of scenario. Yes, it does take part of our participation. That is true. So there's your answer in that.
Okay, thank you. That answered my question. Love you guys.
Okay, thank you. Oh, pardon. There's someone else. I keep getting. I'll go in order, and I don't wait. Oh, pardon. I hope that other person was not first. But go ahead, other person. There we go. Greetings.
Greetings.
Wonderful. The backdrop.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing that. I
just
like
wanted
that.
to share that with you.
Hmm.
Question for you I had was, what has accelerated you to a state of freedom from within on your journey?
What has accelerated me from freedom from within?
freeing yourself from within any
Ah,
previous limitations.
okay. I would say that comes with arrival. And
Mm,
you, everyone arrives at certain points with certain encumbrances or not. And so I would say it came with arrival.
beautiful. Thank you.
Hmm. I like that backdrop. That's wonderful.
Greetings from Kauai.
Ah, okay. Beautiful. I hope you're planting in that place and also, making it a place that is hospitable to others who are like-minded.
Yes, definitely.
Perfect. Okay. And you mentioned your name? Did he mention his name?
I didn't hear his name. Maybe he did. I don't think so though.
Okay. All right. No worries. And I think that's it, so we can continue. The other person dropped off. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, they sent questions. How was your first astral projection from masked hippie? Okay. Uh, I never had a first. So I really would not be able to answer that question. I never had a astral projection. That's not something that I do. You might do that and others might do that, but I don't astral project.
People really don't know how to ask you questions because I don't think that they got to experience you. So it's difficult, I feel like, for them to really ask the question correctly. Because that's why I feel like people should really schedule an appointment with you so that they can make a better connection.
Okay. And it's sometimes it helps when you just sit and think and prepare a question. Questioning is crucial in this place. That's I think there's a podisode on that, on how to ask questions, how to ask and answer questions. It's very important to know how to do so. These are not frivolous topics. There are courses in postgraduate school and graduate school on questions and I'm not just talking about in courses on linguistics and things like that or literature, questioning or psychology even, because you know that they are all about questioning, psychology and psychiatry. They you can say that that school of thought kind of founded the perverse as well as the astute way of asking questions, which means this: questioning and questions are crucial. Questions are vital. We are supposed to question while we're here because that's part of being here, part of the process of knowing, absorbing, and learning.
So that you can fully experience this place and not have any I guess resentment that would keep bringing you back and looping.
Well, if that's the case,
So I just I remember we had the conversation the other night and we were talking about the black and white or dark and light thing and we were talking about the supposed transatlantic slave trade issue. I
mhm.
just I guess I know you could just take it away, but my questions were how did the
Yes, sir.
Aboriginals of how did the Aboriginals of America how did that confederacy or that union break apart and and as far as like the slavery story, what is true about slavery and why did they push Pan-Africanism on the American Aboriginal?
Okay. First, know that slavery, and this you should do, everyone listening, research the word, the term slave, where it comes from, Slav, esclav, and realize two things. Depending on how deeply you travel into your word search, become a wordsmith and go as far as you can, if not further. Slavery is actually an ethnic term. It relates to a particular bloodline, if you will. And therefore, to call an Aboriginal person or their history or their ancestors slaves is beyond misnomer. It's egregiously incorrect. those in the know will probably secretly laugh at those saying these things. And you see people who are supposed learned scholars using these words readily. Right now, what's that thing that new program or movement? It's called race theory, I think, something like that. Race theory.
Critical race theory.
Critical race theory. Thank you. Right there in the words itself, they're telling you, the parasitic people behind it, telling you that this is not something you should be trying to learn. It's a mix of probably a little bit of fact and a lot of stuff that is in service of the empire. For one, it's theory. It's not fact. And that tells you right there. So slave and slavery reverts to a particular people, and those particular people are of a pale skin. Those are the first, in a sense, slaves. Most societies had servitude. Servitude was based on either after effects of a war or in terms of debt. You had bonds and debts and free and contracts. And in order to fulfill contracts of duty, contracts of even in the sense of marriage, you had servitude. And what do you think when someone is a so-called military personnel? That's contract service. You are in servitude. You are a servant. You may not have a broom in hand, but you have some type of tool in hand. It could be whatever kind of weapon was used at the time. You are a servant. But that's not a slave. And a servant has the ability to obviously pay their debt, or someone can pay their debt off, or someone can take on their bond. And if no one takes on that person's bond, you can go into what is called perpetual servitude. That has happened in history to people, to persons, obviously, individuals or groups. It has happened. But the purpose of calling the American Aboriginal slave was part of the whole witchcraft, if you will, paperwork genocide to disappear people while they're still on the land. So they've had many different names used to disappear the Aboriginal off the land and inculcate the minds of those who come later as part of the parasitic colonization process. And remember, parasites live in colonies. And when you take on the will of parasites, you become a parasite. You become part of the horde. And so colonization, manifest destiny, all that entailed using the resources of those or the people who you don't call a host but are a host, and they come in many names. The names that were used to disappear them started with, they didn't first say slaves, they said Negroes. And then from Negroes, slaves, Negro slaves, and then of course as the boundaries went beyond that, it became, colored and black and such. But think about it. When it was first used, and I'm referring to the era between 600 and 800 years past, it wasn't applied to so-called melanated individuals. Your first slaves in this common era, this particular era, came out of North Africa and the Caucasus, and they were traded amongst Arabic, which are a mixed people, mixed race people. They started off very dark, but they took on wives, concubines rather, in order to increase numbers. They didn't take on wives, they took on concubines. The concubines, the offspring of concubines had no, they could not go but to a certain level in society. So many Arab men, and we're talking men that are dark, swart, as the word went in Europe. You don't see them there today. You see some. What you see there now are the after effects of the so-called Ottoman kingdom, not empire, Ottoman kingdom, and that meaning Turk. So the people you see there today in most of so-called Middle East are actually so-called Turk, Guk Turk, Mongol Turk, Sino Turk, so-called Sino meaning Han. So all of the mixed there. In fact, if you look at the early Turk, they had slanted eyes. and red hair, many of them. They did not look like the Turk you see today, the so-called Mediterranean you see today. And these groups, these are your first so-called pale races, along with the dark races of Europeans. Most of Europe was dark skinned, swart. They were trading in slaves, and your slaves were so-called pale people, not white. White came later. That term was used in order to galvanize groups, in order to overthrow most of the dark Europe, of the so-called black nobility, to overthrow them. But in the process, and overthrow a lot of the other pale enslavers. But the primary, and people think, oh, it was just the female. You know, you see many books on the topic, but they put on the adjective white. They'll say white slavery. And the implication of that is, well, if I take off the word white, then what is the default? And so you've been programmed or inculcated to think the default is, the Aboriginal American, aka the so-called black, aka so-called Negro, aka so-called colored, aka so-called African American. That's one clue right there, that you're dealing with an Aboriginal population, multiple names, in order to, as it says in the Bible, to confuse. And in order to confuse, you can also get someone off the land themselves by confusing them. Well, anyway, the original slave and slavery did not happen just 8,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. That happened within a 1,000-year period. So in other words, we weren't enslaving pale races or dark races, as you have been lied to. You had servitude. And you could bond and buy your way out of servitude. No different than a prisoner of war. You did one of two things with a prisoner of war. They either were in service, or actually three things, or you killed them, or you set them free. But the purpose of enslaving someone made no sense. You would take them and put them in camps and make them work for you. The purpose was to benefit, clean up the dead, mine for you, get ore for you. You don't get anything if you enslave someone, literally. So you think of the so-called transatlantic slave tale, and if you think of it in the terms that you have been taught, you are not using your logic. Let's look at that quickly. One, the average so-called pale European, so-called Caucasoid European, male, because we will be talking about male in the form of a so-called slave catcher, did not grow any higher than 5'5", 5'6". All of these things you can actually look up. If you don't want to look it up, go to a museum. If you are in any of the cities like London or Philadelphia, they have museums where you can actually see what people wore, the clothes they wore, the shoes they wore, and you'll see, or the utilities they used in their homes and buildings. These were small people. Look at the doorways. Look at some of the buildings built then. These were small people. So the average so-called African, in this instance, the so-called West African male, because remember, you wouldn't go after females, you would go after males, and that's who they would take. Remember, this shows you the contradiction. Males were used as servants, forced servants, and kept as prisoners of war. So if that was the case, then you would go after males, and then therefore, if the transatlantic slave tale will go with what they tell us, then they were going after males. If you go with the images that are indoctrinated into you, like the ones from the 1976 or 77 TV miniseries, Roots, then that imagery that's been inculcated into you would say that these so-called Africans were cavorting along beaches and picking fruit when they were kidnapped and forced into shackles and made to walk to the shore and then onto ships. That's what they show you. Or their villages, which apparently not too far from the beach, were raided. And they use big, bulky, Mongol big Africans. Now, why are some Africans big and bulky like Mongols and others are sinewy and skinny and slim? Something doesn't make sense. Well, this is the imagery that's been pushed into your mind. Well, in any case, according to the transatlantic tale, hundreds, according to the the literature, not hundreds, the average ship, which would have been similar to a schooner, could fit upwards of 80 to 100, sometimes, so allegedly up to 300 so-called humans, which they would refer to as slaves, in the, I guess, the hull of the ship. So you have a crew. Mind you, you have to have the enslaver. I guess some of the enslavers or catchers, they remained on land, apparently at forts, obviously. And then you had your crew. So the crew had guns. Now you have hundreds of people, all somehow in shackles, and mostly males, and you have guns. These are not rapid fire guns. These are not semi-automatics. These are guns that you have to load. You have to stuff. And they are one fire only, and you got to do it all over again. So meanwhile, you're stuffing, no one's attacking you. This type of tale also serves another purpose. It serves the purpose of instilling docility and supremacy. So docility in those who believe that that's them, that's their blood, that's their ancestry, and supremacy in those that think they are the bloodline of the enslaver. Like, wow, we must be powerful. We enslaved these people and we did this. So that's another purpose of the tale. Okay, let's go with the tale. So these few people, or who knows how many, a crew, the average crew on the ships then, mind you, these are ships coming out of Europe. First ships would be of Portuguese, then Dutch and Spanish, kind of concurrently, then supposedly British, according to the so-called timeline. Well, all of those ships from all of those different factions were about the same size. The largest would have been the Spanish Armada. They would have been the largest of the Euro ships, but the biggest ships of the day did not come out of there. They came out of Asia. They had huge ships you could put elephants on. But those weren't the ships that were used. And that's another tale. I'll go into that maybe another time. So let's go with this. We're talking about the typical ship, which, by the way, doesn't exist anymore, even though it's not been over 500 years. But these ships magically disappeared. They can't find them. They'll give you excuses like they were burned out of shame, or they were repurposed and used as cargo ships. Okay, well, where are they? So there's still just like one or two ships that are supposedly there, and they're just remnants. Yeah, more lies, but let's continue. So you have this small crew, I don't know the number, according to them, they don't tell you how many, but you have all these so-called slaves that never tried to revolt. Well, now let's look at the logistics. The crew has to eat, but more importantly, they have to drink. And there's certain ways that water will ship across salt water, especially the Atlantic Ocean, the most violent of oceans. So you're on a wooden ship. Wood moves. It's not steel. Steel even moves, but it's wood. And so you have bodies up against wood, no buffer. According to the images and the lithographs or whatever they call them, these bodies were barely clad. Therefore, there must be a lot of splintering. And if anyone knows who has a seafaring background, if you get any kind of cut in the middle of the ocean, you have to tend to it quickly. Otherwise, you can get gangrene and a whole slew of infections. So you have all these people who are in this hull of these boats, and they're moving around, they're getting sick, they're vomiting. You know the deal. There's no toilets. There's no compost heaps. There's no holes. You, allegedly, according to them, defecated and urinated on one another. Diphtheria, what else is there? You know, water poisoning, sepsis, you name it. So you have to feed the crew. Where's your food? You can't store food above on the deck. So you have to put your food, you have to put your water somewhere. And most water was stored either in barrels or in some type of animal skin like lamb skin. And you had to keep it fresh. You had most of your other foods were salted in order to preserve them. But still, you had to keep it somewhere, and they have to eat. And you didn't get across the Atlantic in 2 days, regardless of what shipping routes you took, which you normally flowed towards either the so-called South American area, going down towards Bahia, Paraíba, Brazil, or towards the so-called Carib and the Caribbean Sea. But it still took months. Sometimes, if you were fortunate, weeks, but you didn't have a heavy ship. Okay, so you took that amount of time and you get to some port, let's say, according to their tale, Charleston, allegedly, where only about, and the number varies. Some say 300, some say 10,000, some say 300,000. You notice that right there. If there's a disparity in the number, when they kept logs of everything, that's a vestige of the Moorish, or input of the Moorish mindset. Logs on everything when it came to mercantilism and when it came to the ocean. You kept logs on everything. It actually goes beyond them. It goes to the Phoenicians, where you kept logs on everything. That's where you get the whole idea of a birth certificate, records of your birth. So in any case, if you went to Charleston with these so-called slaves, Charleston was a so-called port town, still is. Where did you put this group of obviously tired, obviously dirty, so-called slaves? They claimed they were taken to barns in the region and cleaned up and then taken to places where they can be bought and sold. If you're coming off of a ship, even the crew is going to be emaciated. You're not going anywhere. You have the ability to stand is almost impossible. So you can imagine at this time, if that is the case. So you're taking these people to, and mind you, you don't speak the same language, you're taking them to be traded and bought and sold, and then what, go right to a plantation and put to work? No, you have to use logic. You have to be wise. You cannot be daft about these things. That tells you right there if and when the so-called enslavement of Aboriginal peoples was occurring, it was occurring right here in the Americas, which they do tell you in many accounts. De las Casas, that's one person, you can read his accounts. He will tell you that the so-called enslaved were coming right from the Americas. So they were taking American Indians, which not the American Indian that you have been told is the American Indian. That's the Siberian. They fled from Canada, escaping Mongol hordes. Many of them were brought in as slaves from Asia into the Americas. And they warred with the Aboriginals who were already here, who you would call so-called black.
So yeah, so they were basically just displacing people, I guess, probably killing their mothers and fathers, and then taking the children and moving them to different parts of America.
Discombobulating. It's the whole thing of parasitism. You discombobulate a population of the world, populations of places, and like a shell game, when you discombobulate, you cause chaos, and that causes weakness in the host. And so it didn't just start then. You had, remember, the British were masters of contracts and treaties and things like that. So they had already had a foot in with intermarrying with Aboriginal women in those tribes that were so-called matrilineal in order to have a foothold in the land. Other so-called nations weren't so. They were not that way, and they were modernized. They had cities, stone cities, not teepees. Teepees were built by Mongols, Mongol Turks, and Siberians. They were plain dwellers. They dwelt on plains. They were nomadic. They did not stand in one spot or one place. And any place they did stand in, they did like a lot of the renegade Europeans, which when I say renegade Europeans, that should be watchword for pale-skinned Europeans. Those are Europeans who escaped their melanated masters and their pale-skinned masters. In fact, there are some writings that haven't been purloined that will detail how many of the slaves, which they have named as indentured servants, many of the slaves wrote about how their masters, their pale-skinned masters, were worse than their dark-skinned masters, and that they wanted to go back to Europe after coming here. They were lied to many of the times. They were lied to. and obviously so. You trick someone, you get them here, and when they get here, you don't get that. And in fact, you got to work for me. So many of the pale-skinned people who are now called white today were in servitude for a long time. You know, when I say long time, I mean generationally.
And so when it comes to being bred into slavery, like if you're creating a dog, like you create chihuahuas to catch mice and rats, you create a different dog for a different thing. You know, so you create this slave or Slav, and is it just like a dog? Like where a dog, honestly, when a dog doesn't have a job, it's a miserable dog. It gets into bad things. So like I feel like if you're designed to be a slave, and slavery isn't the same as what they depict it as. Like the true slavery, as you were saying, it's more so like a servitude that you can work your way out of.
Well, that was
If you're
servitude. That was the servitude based on, you know, servant and master system. And many cultures, many nations, they practice that on their own level, on their own way. But the whole slavery concept of perpetual enslavement, that, and you know, not being able to bond out, or being your bond being bought by anyone, where you became what is called chattel or cattle, that came through the slave system post-Portuguese. And remember, the so-called Portuguese were the first of the so-called mulatto groups of Europe. That means that their smart forebears or progenitors had been mixing with concubines, pale-skinned concubines.
so that's yeah, so
Scythians
but
were
that's
doing this for a long time too, but you know, Scythians, what you would call today modern day so-called Jewish, not Jews, but Jewish people, they were also taking part in the pale skin slave trade. They, you know, you talk to any rabbi who is worth his weight in silver and who's not going to lie to you, and they'll tell you the facts. Yes, their people were trading in not just females, so-called pale skin females, but males too, for work, and keeping them in slavery, enslaved. So yeah, you had a large worldwide slave complex of slaves going into China, pale skin, so-called, I'll say it, so-called white people or Caucasians being bought and sold in China, being bought and sold in Europe, being bought and sold in the Americas. Yeah.
so but like these, as far as like being designed to be a slave, if you were designed to do that or to be servant, would you not would you have no problem with your life because
Yeah.
you were more so designed to do it? And like I guess if you had a righteous master, then
Well, you see that evidenced in protocol, or what they call circumstance, you know, where people obey protocol. You see vestiges of that in so-called Latinized America, in the language especially, you know, depending on the country. You call someone Don and Doña, and you'll see how workers, they bend over backwards for certain people, no matter what, because that's where their bread and butter is coming from, but also because their minds are entrained that way. You read about it in tales of serfdom and fiefdom or whatever. You read about how people behaved a certain way. They lowered their heads. They did not look, you know, certain levels of people of certain stature in the eye. You did not turn your back. You bowed down and walked backwards. Things like that. You hear of that when you watch a movie on the so-called antebellum South, where someone would say, "Don't eyeball me, boy," meaning don't look me in the eye. These are all parts of that kind of system. So, you know, people are forced into a mentality and bred into a mentality and bred into a physicality. The so-called Slav did come from a group of people that were, I guess, troglodyte type. And so their mindset was dull and slow, and that was taken advantage of. Some figured just bring them into society on the fringe and use them for menial tasks, things that can be done easily by rote, putting seeds into the ground, monotonous things like that, taking care of a horse. These are all monotonous things. If you were to study so-called so-called medieval Europe, you'll find that this was the case. Why do you think when they tell you these so-called tales of Europe around that time between the so-called fall, which would be around 711 and 1690, they will tell you that so-called Europe was illiterate. The masses were illiterate. And when it came to hygiene, it did not exist. Why do you think these things are leaked out? It's because they're telling you a little bit, but not telling you enough. We're dealing with slave populations. We're dealing with a mix of barbarian populations. These are the populations that had overtaken so-called Europe, overtaken the Aboriginals that were there, from whether we're talking Germany by the Alemanni to so-called Italy by the Oliveri or Grimaldi type peoples. You have an overtaking of these places and then a retaking by certain groups like the Garamantians or so-called Moors when they took over the Iberian coast into, not only through Iberia, into parts of Germany and in England once again, and then of course being overthrown, and then of course being pursued around the planet. And that's where a lot of the Aboriginals got sucked into the madness of these other populations. Hence the reason why the Aboriginals should not have taken part in the societies that developed after Reconstruction. My people should have kept their distance. When you participate, you know the old saying, when you lie down with dogs, or you're judged by the company you keep, in other words. Even though there are great and good people in all types, you don't put yourself into the destiny of another group. And so now they're intertwined. And that's what happened. So a lot of the dirt that the so-called Garamantians and Moors and Jacobians did, when they were over here mixing with the Aboriginals, all these other groups going after them took it out on anyone else that had melanin. And therefore, they got swept up in it too.
So that's basically what created like a slave standard in the world, in a sense, where like if you have slaves running the world, then everybody kind of lives in a slave life instead of.
Well, if you look at some of the papal bulls, the papacy bulls and edicts that came from, let's start with Innocence, and I'll use that word loosely, Pope Innocence, on up to Pope Nicholas, Dum Diversas 1452, where he laid a decree, which was a repeat of a decree, calling for the enslavement of all Saracens, all pagans, all heathens, and that was in reference to anything that is Swart and Swarti, and removal of their power, meaning taking them from power, and their wealth in perpetuity. And what most people don't realize about a papal bull or an edict, it has to be struck down or stricken by a successor pope. No successor pope has stricken or struck down any of those papal bulls. Therefore what?
They continue.
They still stand.
So when it comes to, like you were saying, the Jacobins, like this is the Black French you're talking about.
And yeah, and they intermarried with the British. So when you say British, you're actually talking about so-called black people. When you say English, you're talking about so-called white people. British were the original so-called bloodlines. Most of these people, they intermarried. So yeah, they could claim so-called royalty. That's where the whole subject line came in at. So they literally were cousins to some royal. Not that they were in line to anything, but it would mean a job, an apprenticeship. You know, you never had to want for anything. In other words, in the lines of the levels of a society, you probably, if you were a servant of some form, it could be an apprentice nature, or you may be able to work your way up, and that's how it worked. So that kind of level of society that you saw in Britain and in France or Gaul, you saw mimicked in these colonies by the slaves that overtook these places. You had these insurrections all across the planet. The French Revolution was an insurrection, an overthrow of the final mulatto leadership. And then you had the insurrections in the Americas. These were terrorist acts and they were done by slaves, and until you had the final so-called slave revolt or civil war, where now you had a white class. This is where you get the statuses of so-called black and so-called white. These are status terms. And you'll notice that at the beginning, well, not the beginning, during the let's say the 1890, between the 1790 and 1890, between then, you did not have these statuses. But in 1890, you had three statuses only. And then now, look at the statuses you have on the census. But they still fall within those same original spectrums, black, white. And I think you mentioned on a post about how, was it Ben Franklin or someone who was talking about the different types of classifications of races, and how he was pushing for the increase of the so-called white status, and that white status is a minority when it comes to a so-called species. I say species because I'm now referring to Blumenbach and the use of his terminology when he was using species in terms of people.
Because he was saying that Benjamin Franklin was saying that Germany and all of Europe, mainly outside of the Anglos, were swart or swarthy, which swartz.
Swart. And swart means black.
And so that means like the Dutch, this West India Company, I mean, because I've been to the Netherlands and I remember being there around Christmas one time, and they had this, I guess, this ritual where people go around the town in blackface.
Yeah, Zwarte Piet. Zwarte Piet is a ritual where they put on, they don, they darken, or if you say blacken or darken, their skin with some type of makeup or shoe polish. It used to be shoe polish. And then they would put on they didn't have Afro wigs, so they'd find a wig that's curly. So they'd find a curly wig because, the slave population did not have curly hair. They had straight hair or tow hair. So they would find one of those and they would put on the typical garb that you would see, which would be something red. So you had Zwarte Piet, and I think you had the other character, which was, it wasn't Santa Claus, it was something else. It was more of a duality figure.
Like almost like an Odin, I forget. I know he had like a staff.
Right, and it was a duality figure in that if you did good, you were rewarded. Supposedly, mind you that when you're dealing with history and folklore and with repeat actions, what they call ceremony and ritual, if you look at them all together, you will get the truth out of it. And what you are seeing, like no different than you see in Spain with the so-called running of the bulls, it tells you right there what that is about. They do it in most so-called Latinized countries, the running out of the bull. The bull is representing something like the running out of snakes. They're talking about the removal of the aboriginal or the so-called black, whether it be snake, whether it be bull, or in this instance of something called Zwarte Piet. If you were bad, you got put in a bag and taken out. And I'm trying to remember the name. I want to remember the name of, he was the sidekick, in other words. Zwarte Piet is the sidekick to Saint Nicholas. But if you notice, Saint Nicholas is represented by an albino or a so-called Caucasoid, as opposed to the actual Saint Nicholas. If you were to look up the real Saint Nicholas, who allegedly developed not only developed the languages there, but also was triumphant in pushing back the Turks. So how could he go from, look at him, he's dark, he's so-called black, and then you have him represented as this man, this devoid of melanin with a beard and with a staff, and he has a black sidekick named Zwarte Piet. That tells you the man with the big pointed crown and fish hat, the mitre, is actually supposed to be black, and Zwarte Piet is actually supposed to be pale. And if you know about Dutch, if you know about German, black, bleak, blank, bleach, black are all the same word. Black means bleach. I remember in South Africa when during the so-called apartheid times, they had signs up which would say net blank, which means no blank, meaning like blank line in English, blank meaning empty, void, but in Dutch meaning black, blank. And if you look it up, do the etymology, it means to bleach, to take the color out. That's why the Zwart Piet is actually the reverse of the person who you see as St. Nicholas. And they will show you all over Europe St. Nicholas and the statues of St. Nicholas as a so-called black person. I don't say black because it's part of that status terminology. It's part of the misnomer terminology. It's a technology, and to be part of it is to empower it. So I don't use black. I don't use white. And I suggest your listeners, your viewers, do not do the same. If you want to come out of that and search your bloodline, find out who your bloodline is, come out of that black-white stuff. You get nowhere, and in fact, think about it. You go with these two statuses, you have now relegated those people that came before you to nothing. You can't even think of, I ask anyone, what's your great, 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 great grandfather's name? Some might know, most don't. They don't exist. So they just exist in a history of whiteness or history of blackness. Come out of that. You're not black and you're not white. If we're going by color, then you would be a liar. You know, a child is taught to tell the truth, supposedly. And if you give them a set of crayons and say, okay, they know the colors, and the colors might be on the crayon or the marker. When they're coloring, they know black and they know white, they know orange. So if you tell the child, I'm black, the child, if they're wise or smart, they will say, no, you're not. You're not the same color as this crayon or this marker. But we want to say to the child, oh, well, I'm black. How can you explain to that child that you're black or that you're white? Again, you would have to teach them how to swallow the lie.
Truly.
These are status terms. White is a status, black is a status.
And people are taught. People are taught today. Plenty of people fight me tooth and nail about this. They say that white is all colors and that's pure light and that's all the colors combined, and that black is void of color. A lot of people go with that. I don't know where that school of thought generated from, but like you said, a child can put all the colors together and put all the paint together, and they're never going to get white out of putting all the colors together.
No, not at all. And you know, if you might hear, and you will hear, if you listen to these media distractions, where you hear someone saying, people of color this, or a person of color this, and it might be a so-called white person saying it, or it might be a so-called black person saying it, or it might be a so-called non-white person saying it who could fit into any of the spectrums. You notice no one in these other spectrums says, oh, I'm a yellow person, or I'm a beige person, or I'm a cafe con leche person. No, you got black, you got white, and that's it. Or you have black, white, non-white, or you have non-white and white. But what is this with people of color? So you hear a Chinese woman call herself a person of color versus a so-called white person. So if she's a person of color and the so-called white person calls her a person of color, then what color is the so-called white person? Because all these other people are people of color. So what is the person of color if they are white? Are they a person of color too? Obviously, they cannot be in that spectrum. And if that's the case, and this person of color who claims to be Chinese is talking about the racism she experiences as a result of being a person of color or having a color, then wouldn't that mean that it makes sense not to have a color in this empire? Because if you have a color, you're going to get treated like you fill in the blank. No pun intended.
So yeah, you got people like you know, as far as the Pan-African movement is concerned, you got people like Marcus Garvey that people would look to him and say, oh, this person is quote unquote black, but they're not from the same bloodline as the Aboriginal American, and they're not, like you were telling me, he's not even from an African bloodline. He's
right.
An original British.
This is what is done when you have these two status monoliths. Well, it's not even a monolith. the Aboriginal is placed in a monolith, is placed in a compartment. And if you notice, and if you're astute about it, you read and listen, you'll notice that many nations are in this realm that are classified as so-called black, they don't use that term, or either they'll fight to not use it, or it'll be snuck in slowly through their media, through their schools, through their youth, and eventually they're calling themselves black in their own countries. Because I know full well that so-called Africans of various nations never called themselves black. And then you started to hear slip into the so-called white media, Black Africa.
Yeah, I remember hearing Haile Selassie. He said, when he was questioned if he was black, he said no. I mean, I've heard that he's from an Edomite line too, though. But I mean, either way, he still was correct in saying that he wasn't a color.
Exactly, because he knew what was up with that. To be a color, to be relegated to a color, or in this instance, a non-color, according to the color spectrum, in order to be relegated to that, that means that you are adopting slave status. You are adopting non-void status, especially in an empire. That means you have no nation, and in the terms of religion, you have no prince, as in, a savior. That means no one has taken your bond, and in the Bible, that would be the Israelite. No one will take their bond. No one will speak your name. Your name will be wiped clean from everything. So you have no name. You have no nation. You're just black. And black is the color of a shadow. And the shadow is always underfoot of everyone. And what do you see in the Aboriginal of America? Everyone can come in and step on the Aboriginal. Get a store in your hood. Open a business there. You can. Have you as a customer. You're the number one. Your males are the number one imprisoned, enemy of the state. Your females are now being used against you because they've taken the bait in the feminist movement. And as most people don't know, feminism is just a vestige. It's just another part of the whole status game. Feminism is racism. Feminism is so-called white supremacy or hegemony. It's just another vestige of it, and people don't realize that. They don't read. If you actually read early feminism and early suffrage movements, they were so-called ex-slaves, which would mean so-called white females, Birch Society, Daughters of the American Revolution, and they were all up in arms that so-called black males or Aboriginal males were voting and could vote and own land, and they couldn't. So they despised that and wanted that fixed, forthright. And that's where feminism came out of. Go look this up. There's actually one famous feminist suffragette who said that if lynching will be the cure-all to stop these Negro males from raping white women and destroying the virginal vestitude or something of that nature of white femininity, then lynch away, something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing her. So in other words, she said if lynching would stop interracial dating and mixing, then I'm all for lynching. This was a suffragette. She is also considered she was the mentor or mentorette of Susan B. Anthony, of quite a few women who looked to her. She was also a first-time senator. Her Senate seat and her Senate servitude lasted, I think, a week or a day, something like that, and then she croaked or died afterwards. But she is looked upon, and many statues are in her honor. So a lot of this stuff goes on, and people don't even realize this right in front of their faces. How so-called whiteness became whiteness, how so-called blackness became blackness, and how they are both two statuses. How the so-called Masonic rituals are part of the ongoing processes to keep these statuses in motion. And they tell you right there in every Masonic temple, it's no accident, with their checkered floor, their black and white floor, or their chessboard floor, rather. It's a chessboard.
So like you said, it's all about having a nation, and like you got Nigerians, you got Jamaicans, you got all these different nations of people, and the Aboriginal of America doesn't have a nation currently, even though the nation is their nation.
Correct. And you mentioned Nigerians. Ask any Nigerian if there's any Nigerians listening. This is about truth, not about anything else. So be truthful. If you want to comment or speak about it, be truthful about it. You know these things are real. Any Nigerian will tell you their parents, if they're first or second generation, will tell them don't associate with those, some might say the N-word, some might say, American black, because they look down upon them. They're not us. They are correct in that. They are not us. But at the same time, would you call that white racism? No, because they're not considered white. You would call that what? That's the way of the empire. You don't associate with anything that is of the slave status, because that will bring you down.
So anything that's associated with the American Aboriginal is taboo, so to speak. And
taboo, unless it's for entertainment or there's some benefit to intermixing with them, or in most instances, total ignorance. A lot of people have no idea and they mix, but then there are those they do know. Look at it in terms of commerce. In terms of commerce, you do not see commerce flowing in that direction. The purpose is to keep them remember the papal bulls, to keep them in a perpetual state of slavery or enslavement, of relegation and subjugation. And in terms of commerce doesn't flow to the so-called hood. Commerce doesn't flow that way. If you look at society setup, especially now, the aim is to keep the so-called Aboriginal female above the Aboriginal male. So you find 60% of graduate school graduates of Aboriginals are female, when only 10 to 20% are male. So that's telling you right there, that's one way to keep generational wealth away out of the hands of a so-called Aboriginal. But in terms of commerce, you don't see banks in the hood. You don't see where's Whole Foods in the hood? You don't see businesses and corporations clamoring to set up shop in the so-called hoods of America, or the so-called ghettofied areas of America, or the country or rural areas of America. What you do see is all the negatives flowing in those directions. That is perpetual servitude. That is perpetual subjugation. And so you figure, well, wait, if this is coming from a papal bull, I thought we are separation of church and state, and we're not Catholic. We're not Roman Catholic. Why would we be listening to a pope? Why is any country listening to a pope? Why do all the leaders go and bow to the pope?
So that's that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm done there.
Oh no, I'm not, because you were talking about treaties and in legal terms. Considering yourself a minority legally is damaging, and like it's self-defeating, like legally, to call yourself a minority. Correct.
In a legal sense, it's damaging. It's detrimental. In an esoteric sense, unless you have the power, you don't use that. In an exoteric sense, you're using the power of opposite. And you have many groups that are literally minorities. I won't name any names. They literally are minorities, but they hold power in that. And the power is in being a minority, not a huge majority or majority. But to call yourself minority in a legal sense, and you hear that done quite often with the people who call themselves African American, and they might mention, or others will call them that will put you in a state of, you're a ward basically of the state, a minor. You're not, in terms of contract or civil law, you're not supposed to contract with a minor, and any contract with a minor is considered void. And if you do contract with a minor, you have to have a legal guardian or someone who can vouch for that or stand for that. As you see in entertainment, because many of your entertainments are minors, but they have to have some type of legal guardian who has power of attorney. So what does that say? That says in a societal sense, there is power of attorney over a minority. Who would be that holding the power of attorney over the minority? I guess the same person who's holding the trust. You have a trustee holding power over you, a dominion over you, and they don't know that. And so you are calling yourself, in a legal sense, a minority, then you will be perpetually powerless. You'll be a minority. Minority will never win over a majority. A minority will never have power in a society that is majority rules.
So when these treaties were made, like these treaties that are still standing, like you said, the Papal Bull, these treaties they were made
Now
with
that's not a
people in the,
treaty. Pardon, I didn't want to interrupt you, but a papal bull or an edict is not a treaty. Those other things that were the friendship treaty and hundreds of others, if not more, those other treaties, for example, the ones made between the British and many of the tribes of, let's say, of the Mississippian tribes, those are treaties, and many of them stand to this day. And then, of course, many of the treaties made with the Mongol nations, the Mongol Siberian or Mongol Turk nations, those still stand. You have some that were used to set up nations, new nations, like the Cherokee Nation. That's an amalgamation of so-called tribes. And then you have the recognition treaties. That's why you have certain groups that are allotted blood money, basically, to stay quiet and to just get along and go along, or set up casinos and things like that. These
I've
are
read
all.
that. Okay, I've read that that the Cherokee used to go out and corral so-called runaway slaves and bring them back for like a bounty.
Well, you can say so-called Cherokee because that's actually not even the name, but the real name of one of the nations, Anuai, is not even used anymore. But that doesn't sound anything like Cherokee.
No. So like with the Mongols, like you said, they when it comes to like for instance the Seminoles and the Seminole Wars, they supposedly fought side by side with so-called Negroids or the Black Aboriginal, but when it came time to claim like I guess money from the state, they said that these black people aren't Seminoles, we're the real Seminoles, they're not, and so they can't prove it, so we deserve the money in the casinos or whatever. They don't.
Yeah, that all came out of the so-called rolls that were used during the latter part of the so-called 19th century, when rolls were being used to make claims by primarily slaves. When I say slaves, you know from what I explained earlier who I'm referring to. I'm referring to people who later became white. And I'm not talking about so-called mulatto. I mean actual people, pale-skinned people who were either Caucasus Mountain, Euro descent. Those people, these people, they eventually were intermingling and marrying with a lot of the so-called Mongol groups. And through these roles, like the Dawes rolls, they were able to have their names placed on lists for land and land rights, land right allotments. During that time of, homesteading and land allotments, you could either marry into the group or into the tribe, and eventually maybe even take over the tribe, which has been done and is done, and you see it to this day. If you look up a lot of these Mongol tribes and many of the nations, look at the photos of their board of directors and their head chiefs, they look no different than Bill Gates.
So what is it that makes a person pale, and what is it that makes a person dark, and what are the signs that a person that is of paler color what is the sign that they have neuromelanin?
Well, you have various forms of mutation that have occurred over time spans. And one of the isolated traits that is the primary trait that has been traced to, some even call it the fallen angel seed, because it's not found in nature. It actually was they say injected in nature, and it's only found in certain so-called species of animals, multi-celled animals, starting with either zebrafish, koi fish, and then of course you step up into people, and then it's into so-called those with Neanderthal traits, and that would be the gene marker SLC24A5. And you can look that up as well and read a lot of it. They study to this day. They still study it because it's an ongoing trait, but it's a mutation, and it is the mutation that causes so-called paleness. I don't say whiteness because that's a misnomer. It's just as blackness is a misnomer. So just say paleness, and it causes paleness. But they cannot, for the life of them, still, or at least they say in their literature and the abstracts, and I don't trust any of those, but they claim they don't know how it perpetuates itself, because typically over time, when there's intermixing, you would think that it doesn't return, but it does continue. Hence the reason some call it fallen angel seed or Neanderthal seed.
It's something that you can't really wash away.
Right.
So, because I mean, from all my research, it brought me to, like, if I look at anything that's pale or light or has traits of albinism, whether it be a white tiger or a supposed white tiger or white gorilla or even white dogs, they are all products of the blood, the gene pool being too small and inbreeding happening to where you now have this pale skin or this pale fur, whatever, what have you, this pale graft version of the truth. And yeah.
And normally in so-called nature has a way of repairing itself, and so what occurs in species, or pardon that use of that word, but in species like that have these recessive traits, they usually are infertile, or if they are fertile, their fetal members are not viable. They may not last long, or they'll be very sickly. And in the so-called animal world, as opposed to the people world, in the animal world, they know best not to mate with something that's sickly. Some animals will stay far from it and let it die, or some will eat it, depending. But only in the people world do we try to perpetuate that, not realizing you are perpetuating suffering. When something is not supposed to be, it's not supposed to be. When something can be repaired through intermingling, then it can be, and you know it. But in many instances, intermingling is not going to help. It's just going to repeat a pattern that will create a devastating effect over time in its offspring. Or you create many different things. And as we know, through all the various literature, that if you kept abreast of all of these myths and stories and facts and tales, you'll see that it goes from enmity between seed to poisoning of lineages. This all occurs as a result of not respecting the actual law. Some say the law of the universe, some say law of nature. I say the law of the Most High, or the law of that which manifested or originated and created all, which has a way of taking care of everything. We just have, people just have a way of being arrogant about some things.
So when it comes to neuromelanin, what gives a person neuromelanin? How do they know that they have that?
Well, you see neuromelanin and eumelanin, which is a carbon-based melanin. You see that in its concentration in pretty much most of the people of this planet, primarily the aboriginals of this planet. And then there are pseudo forms of it that you might find in some groups that have, I think it's called, not acromegaly, vitiligo, so-called vitiligo, which is also a form of leprosy. And these are the mutations. So you see people who are melanated, but you may not see it, but they might have a small spot. That small spot might grow, or it might manifest in an offspring, and that small spot is an example of the mutation, or is a representation of that mutation that will occur somewhere down the line, if not in that very person.
So whether it be vitiligo or eczema or just outright albinism, it's all kind of like different degrees of the same thing?
Yeah, these are forms of mutation. And look up the science. The scientists will say that, and I'm not making these terms up. So-called science calls these mutations recessive traits. Recessive traits. I did not make up that term either. But look these things up so you'll know what you'll know where you are. It's important to know the truth. You cannot continue to live in delusion. Parasites will get over on you and will continue to get over on you as long as you don't face the truth. The truth
So
is, don't
sorry.
get afraid of it, and don't allow your emotions to get the best of you. It's just truth. It's what is. The people who came before you, they came before you, and we are here, all of us, as a result of the things that they've done. And we don't want to continue in either their disobedience or nor their ignorance. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is deadly.
So when it comes to like what makes a person pale, I always wonder, like, was it like the chicken or the egg thing? Like, did somebody get infected with a fungus and then they started grafting people or grafting themselves, or did or what happened? Because like to me, like because you were saying, like in a lot of cases, people that are pale are almost like a personified fungus in a sense. Like if we're looking at the body, like the world like a body, I guess you have some people are like microbes, some people are like fungus, some people are worms, some people are actual or aboriginals.
Well, akin to a fungus, they would be more sulfur based. That's what I meant. So you have pheomelanin, which is more sulfur rich, and eumelanin, which is carbon rich. Those are two separate elements, obviously. And, whether the paleness came as a result of mutancy from leprosy, which is a blood-borne disorder, or it came from something interjected into, that would be the graft, interjected into the realm of bloodlines. That is, now we're talking about what most people who are fearful or who want to evade will not discuss. That we're always dealing in the ethereal and the physical, or what some might call the spiritual and the physical. You're always dealing in both. So that interjection could be, and not could be, but is no different than what you see today. I'm sure of it. Many have stopped and asked, why would some researcher, name a company, some biotech company, Monsanto, why would some researcher or researchers have a meeting and then go to their labs and decide, I want to join or splice the genes of a spider and a pomegranate? Why? Why would you, regardless of what goes through your mind, why? And I don't, you would hear some, oh, this will save the planet someday, or this might be the cure. That's nonsense. So I'm sure many of you have asked that question. Why? What goes through that person's so-called mind? Well, maybe that's not a person.
And so, yeah, I mean, and like you were saying, in the case of leprosy, I bring it back to like the Bible, and it was talking about the tale of Naaman. And Naaman had vitiligo, and then he dipped his hand into the Jordan, and it came out. It says that the quote is that he pulled his hand out, and his skin was clean. He was a clean leper, and his skin was white as snow. So so basically, that's what leprosy was. When they talk about lepers in the Bible, that's what they mean. Somebody
Yeah,
that has full on vitiligo, or the vitiligo is completely taken over, or the fungus, I guess you could say, has taken over.
exactly. They were devoid of melanin. They became like and I'm not putting anyone down, they became like a Michael Jackson.
So when someone is dark, is what makes them dark? Darkness is essentially light, actual light, right?
Well, no, darkness is a communication effect. You have to communicate with the world around you. That's why we are here in the forms that we are in. And the melanin that you have within you, if you are utilizing it correctly, you are able to communicate with all around you. So therefore, most who are devoid of melanin or melanin deficient, they have levels that they cannot access because they just don't have the melanin there. Therefore, you see it in physical form when their skin reacts negatively to such things as so-called spectrum of light, or to certain histamines. And you see it in the form of either rashes or peeling or burns even. In the eyes, in the sclera of the eyes, you see people who have burns from looking in the sun. It can also form inside in the form of lack of reasoning or lack of empathy, which some call psychopathy. You see that internally. So there's also, when there are external manifestations of deficiencies or inconsistencies, there's also internal unseen manifestations of inconsistencies. So you find people who are cold and distant, or who have a certain type of mentality towards others based on their lack of true melanin.
So the body is expressing the metaphysical. It's an
Yeah,
expression. Yeah,
of
it's just an
course.
expression. Yeah.
This is just basic truism or commonality. We can no longer continue to go on like this, is, compartmentalized. That is one of the ways parasites win, because they have you all separated into various compartments, not realizing you don't come here in compartments. Everything is connected in that sense. You should know that the so-called spirituality, the so-called physical, are all intertwined, and don't relegate one for the other. Respect them all. You're taught to, people go to church. I'm sure many of the listeners or viewers go to or have gone to some religious type of building or ceremony, and were brought up in such, and so they respect their progenitors and their choices. So they have been influenced in some way, even if they may not do the same practice any longer. When you were participating in that, or your progenitors were participating in that, they did so to some degree religiously or faithfully or seriously or casually. Regardless, they had a participation in it because they either believed in it or trusted in it. And they trusted in something unseen. They believed in something unseen. Therefore, they knew that the purpose of having this trust in the unseen was that they knew there was more than meets the eye. And then
So
all of a
that
sudden came Monday. And then all of that went out the window until the next day of so-called worship and fellowship. Do you see the compartmentalization?
yeah, all the separation, but the melanin is constantly connected. It's like the melanet, the Ethernet is constantly
Is constantly
connected.
like Wi-Fi, like, cell phone tower, is beyond that kind of thing. This, speaking of so-called technology today, you want to talk about so-called ancient technology, don't think of it in terms of metal and moving parts. Metal, moving parts, wires, that is so-called primitive. And I use that word loosely. That is rustic. True technology that was above what you see today did not require all that crap.
It
Metal,
was true wireless fidelity.
true wireless, exactly.
So when it comes to the Bible, we were talking the other day. You were saying we were talking about Adam and Eve, and I was saying, like, in the Quran they speak of Adam and Eve in plurality, and I've seen it in the Bible as well. Like these are groups of people. There's not just one individual, and so we were talking about, like, I guess the fall from grace, and I guess I wanted to talk about psychedelics because I know a lot of people that are watching this partake in psychedelics, and you were saying something to the effect that basically Eve was taken from the fruit, or because I guess a being is a tree of life in some sort, or there everybody's like some sort of tree of consciousness, and the
In
tree of good.
philosophy, in philosophy and in certain cultures, the tree, a person was represented by a tree, or spoken of as if a tree, the old sage, the old tree. So a tree, you could say, is a euphemism or representation in literature of a person of stature, a person of old, a person of renown, someone of great knowledge, a tree. So an old wise tree. Therefore, if we're talking about a tree, we're talking about a person, possibly a professor, someone who's getting around campus, walking around, but stay away from that professor. She's a he, whatever, is a perv. Or he, just their school of thought will lead you down the path of destruction. Just be careful of that professor, literally. So we're talking about a tree, or are we talking about a person? We're talking about an individual, an entity
So
who
the
can
tree of good
inform.
and evil, the tree of good and evil, the tree of good and evil came in human-like form.
It came in a form that Eve could talk to, could not, you walk up to a tree and you see things in a simplistic sense. This is a parable sense. That's fine. That's your growth process. But if you go along according to the stagnation of parasitic religions, they want you to stay in that form. That's one thing. That's one thing you know about a parasite in parasitic situations. They want you to stay there in that form. They can't feed if you grow. So unless they control the growth process. Therefore, if you stay in that process of thought, so-called thought, where you're seeing two naked people with, well, no cloth yet, no leaves yet, but two naked people in the forest, and there's a tree here and all these other trees. Well, think for a minute. Use your logic. If there's all trees and they all have fruit, because anything that didn't have fruit is considered a parasite tree, accordingly. But all these trees have fruit. How are you going to tell one tree from the other? Okay, Adam, that was his domain when before Eve was manifested to go and name all the things and all the trees. Okay, so that meant that he had to be there for a while, and he knew even that tree because he was either told about it or he named it. Who knows? But in any case, all these trees are just trees. If you go by the child model, and so therefore she's picking up all these trees except that one. All you got to do is stay away from that tree. You don't have to go near it. If you go near it, then that would mean either the tree has some way to send out a pheromone, a song, a bird to get you to come to it, or are you curious, or are you being haughty or disobedient? That is what comes out of the interpolation in the stagnation form. So therefore, it's her fault. See, she was disobedient. And if she only listened and stayed away from it, she would not have been beguiled. There's part truth in that. But the rest, you can toss it because it doesn't make sense. You need to mature out of that and realize we're not talking about a tree. We're talking about a being who could get around, and that's why I use the image of a campus. Literally, think about a campus. For those who have been on a campus or who have experienced a campus, a big one. You have a quad area, you've got all the buildings, and a campus is set up like a tree. You see it from above. You see how it's set up. Each building is like the fruit on the tree, and you go into it to get certain fruit. And professors, the way they used to dress according to the so-called traditional model, you would see them wearing the same robe that you wore on graduation. They'd be walking around campus in those robes. So you knew them when you saw them. And they'd be walking around in their robes like a judge.
And the judges, judges all for just for a side note, judges always wear black robes or dark robes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So the judges of the earth are actually
correct.
Else. Yeah.
Correct. So you'd be walking around and talking and designating kind of like a Taliban or whatever, and people would come to you like they would to sages and seek things and seek information. So all it would take would be one little sit down and think about it. That's what the traditional way of learning was. You learned from and you learned by doing and listening.
So Eve took from this being and brought it to Adam. And what do you think, or what is it that she brought to him? Because like you're saying, it's more of a kaleidoscopic view than a flat, mundane view.
There's a being and doing to learning. You learn, then you do. So there's a being and doing. So whatever it was encompassed whatever she learned. Whatever she absorbed, she brought it to the table of their household and was implanting it into their life and their lifestyle. And so that's what people do when they come home with something new. You bring it into the home and it becomes part of your living. And you take on that new encroachment or new learning.
So what do mushrooms do to you, and how long do they stay in your system? Because they colonize, right? Their psilocybin, it's a colony, right? Like it's a living entity inside of you that you've taken on, like you just suggested, that you take it into your home and it's like kind of part of your being now.
Yeah, mushroom is a microcosm of a so-called universe. So you have to be extremely careful, and I warn against taking them or using them, period, because the average person, the average so-called, I shouldn't say average, the everyday person has been so thwarted from growth that they barely even know what sex is, let alone a mushroom. And when you take in a mushroom, you are ingesting time or timing and everything that is in a collective. So it's a doorway. And remember, you already know you are a portal. And as a portal, you are semi-permeable. So why are you taking on these multiple portals? It was said that one of the writers who, and there were a few of them, who came up with H.P. Lovecraft, they were into mushrooms and mushroom experimentation. And that was how he accessed the person who came from, allegedly, I think, Iraq or somewhere, who taught him about these ancient ones, and how not only taught him about them, but introduced him physically, or in the sense of the mushroom sense, to these things. And there you got these writings. But not only him, many others. There's others who did the exact same thing.
So what do these things do to your body, like as far as like psychedelics? Like, I guess we can go down the line, you know, whether it's LSD or Bufo or DMT, or like, people are just being opened up for something by something.
Yeah, when you say open your mind, you literally are opening your mind, and then some. LSD has after effects, has residual effects. Also, think about it for a minute, and I want you to really start hearing and thinking. This you probably just heard it, all of you. You probably just picked up on it, and it echoes. Everything you ingest is going to have a residual effect. You are performing a creation ritual, a creation destruction ritual, over and over again. So everything has to have an effect. It's not a side effect. That's the law of parasites. So there's no side effect. It's an effect. It's direct effect. And then there are residual effects. That's not a side effect. A residual effect is what occurs moments or years or days or a lifetime after the ingesting of a portal drug.
So people got to look at it more of in a long-term sense, instead of like, oh, it's 3 hours has passed, it's over now, or 10 minutes has passed in the
It's
DMT
not
or
over.
Bufo.
It's
Yeah.
never over. It's not over. So watch what you put in yourself. If that wasn't the case, why do you think these biotech companies and experimental companies, they know that what you put into you has lasting effects? Why do you think they put patents on a lot of the things that they have? Because they know that down the road, that's what they're talking about. The effects of these things. They're going to manifest in some form, in some way, in some, who knows what, organism. So they want to have control over those things before they get here. Therefore, everything you put into you has an effect. From the advertising that they put into you, that you hear, that you see, it has a lasting effect. If it didn't, why do you see it when you go to the store? Why are your buying habits the way they are? Why does porn last in you? That's how you have to watch. Literally, no pun intended, what you put in you. Watch your doors. You are a portal. And as a portal, you must be extremely wary of what goes in you. From the so-called music.
So what is it that as far as like the etiquette? What is the etiquette for, you know, because you said it's a creation destruction cycle as far as doing psychedelics or doing any substances, whether it's food or whatever it is. When it comes to the creation destruction cycle, how should one perform the mechanical act of sex, and how should one lay themselves down to pass on?
The same with the mushroom. What's your purpose? The same with sex. What's your purpose? You just doing it to do it because it feels good? That's your choice. As I said many times, you have the option to do whatever. I'm not quoting anyone. I'm not promoting anyone. You know the people that we're talking about. I'm not promoting their so-called schools of thought. And they didn't make those things up. They just looked at things, and they had to take psychs and psychedelics and electro this and electro that in order to just achieve what I've arrived knowing. That you do things and there is residue. You do things because you can. People murder. They shouldn't and they mustn't, but they do. So that means you can do whatever the heck you want, but there's always a residual.
So when it comes to sex for creation, the way that it should be, how should it be conducted? What should two people do prior, like as far as like setting the area up and the whole mechanics of it? Is there anything that you can provide insight on?
There has to be purpose. There has to be purpose, clear-cut purpose. And within the space of timing, and I'm sure there are some people who got some of it down. They know that within the space of timing, that if they do this at this particular time, they will come forth with the following. But it goes beyond that.
It's precision more than even just simple farming. But I mean, like I figured that if you're having sex with someone, you want it to be less rapey as possible and more
To be
more.
rapey at all,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I know, but I mean, like you said, the porn that people have been subjected to, that's like a perversion. That's not really sex. That's more so rape. And
No, that's
people have,
animalism. That's just being an animal. That's taking you. That's vile. It is. You can call it rapey if you want, but you're allowing yourself to come out of your true being, your true self, and you are now something other. Along the lines of a beast, not even an animal. Pardon the animals. You're a beast. So you're coming into the beast realm. That's a violation if you're not a beast. And look at those who are behind it. Those are clear-cut parasite beings. It's usually the same factions. They have a tendency to want to be seen. They're very exhibitionistic. And so they thrive off of that. They control these industries, especially the so-called porn industry. Same people, same usual suspects, or same parasites. And they thrive off of it. You got to be blind to participate in it. And not blind, literally either ignorant in the sense of willfully ignorant, and apathetic to participate in something of this nature, and to allow it to come into you and then act as a residual in how you then behave in your intimate moments with someone you claim to care for.
so when it comes to a man retaining his seed, like as we were speaking the other night about men living, and when Asia was dark, men were living 120, 150, 200 years still being fertile. They were retaining their seed and I guess being just conscientious farmers. And I guess like people ask me like, what should I eat to nourish my seed, and how should like as far as the seed cycling goes, when do I know is the best time to procreate? Like what is the cycle for the seed?
So the best time to procreate is no different than procreating for um, the arrival or re-arrival of harvest, if you want to call it that, but then at the same time, knowing that what is necessary in your world, knowing what is necessary in your community, that's what you are projecting in your thought. So we need the following in our place, and so we are going to plan for that. You plan for it. You have been nourishing seed since you were juvenile, so your seed should be, pardon the term, super sperm. By that point, it's cycled around, it goes through all the various areas up through the cortex and around and through the spine, so it's literally super. So you're not going to put seed into land or terra that is not worthy or has not nourished itself. But that's what happens, and that's the foolishness of it all. And vice versa. Why would you allow if you are fertile and you are nourished, but you allow weak, simpy seed into your fertility, you are not a wise woman. You're not a wise woman at all. You're just a female.
And that's what I've heard, just from watching Sebi and different people too, is that different seeds can't even find different eggs. Like for a dark woman's egg, for a pale person's seed to find it, the egg has to start to die in order for the seed to even get on the same wavelength to locate it.
It's correct. It loses resonance. It drops in resonance because that's, it's called recessive. It has to become recessive seed in order to become, to start the impregnation or conception process. And that you don't want to do. Why would you do that? You're basically like dropping in voltage. You're using an inverter in the wrong way or in the reverse way in order to get power. you wouldn't do that. You want to magnify. You don't want to go in reverse. So everyone unto their own in that regard.
So when it comes to laying yourself down to pass on, um, it's something that you should plan just like you should plan a life, right? The whole thing should be planned, like
Yeah,
in a sense.
you had many groups that knew this. We always talk about the so-called Egyptians that did it, but we always talk about it in the wrong sense, the inculcated sense, and in the sense of um, looking to them as if they are higher up than us. Like people worship the so-called Queen and Charles, whatever the hell their names are. I I don't know their names, but I'm just saying those people in England and Beatrice or whatever. When we refer to them as if they're higher than us, better than us. So the same thing applies when people are talking about ancient Egyptians. But when you do that, you now separate yourself from the truth and the knowing and the logic of what was going on. They were preparing for afterworld during this
The whole
world.
life, the whole
Right.
life.
And that's what we should be realizing. Not looking at it, oh, these were wealthy people, these were rich, these were royals. And no, don't get caught up in that. Look at what's going on and the basic of it all. So religions take that, but then, of course, they're stagnating and parasitic, and they turn it to a perverted way of the same thing. They will tell you, for example, in Islam, or they'll tell you in Christianity, or even in Judaism, that you live a righteous life and you will go to a better place. They're not telling you the full capacity of it all. They're not telling you what's involved in all that. They're not telling you that you must reflect upon the past, your own and those that came before you, that you can recall and not repeat in those patterns. And in many instances, you must undo the things that you've done and the things that were left upon you in a legacy in order
And
to
so
proceed forward.
it's the same thing. Like when you plant your seed in a woman, like you kind of put as far as like planting your body into the earth, back into the earth, giving it back to the earth. You don't want to be in a cemetery with a bunch of other different types of beings in there. Like you had, like you said, like as far as breeding together, people should amplify together if they're on the same wavelength. They should work
Correct.
together. So when you going back into the ground, it should be the same thing, right? You're putting these people with their people and these people with their people, not just a cemetery of a bunch of different everything.
Correct. Now, some disagree that you shouldn't be going back into the ground at all, that you should be going higher. And in order to go higher, you need to be converted into the next phase of element, which would be a gas or smoke, in order to go into light. Some think that, so they burn or they cremate.
So when like in the supposed Egyptian or Kemetic culture, I've seen it says that when you die or when you pass on, that you have your heart weighed against the feather of Ma'at, and if it's too heavy, then this the goddess Amut each devours your heart, and then it gets shredded, and then I guess you restart. I guess I'm not sure, but I
Shoot,
asked it.
shoot devours it, supposedly. Shoot, not
Okay,
shoot.
no, I said Amut. Like so, it's like a supposedly what I've read was like a half crocodile, half lion, half hippopotamus goddess. I don't
Hmm.
know. But
Okay.
that's probably some other thing that's just an adulteration. But the heart is being weighed at death. So is the heart the center of consciousness? Because I've read that it has more there's more nerves coming from the heart to the brain than vice versa.
Well, if you're looking at it in terms of, remember, I didn't want you to get, I have to be, must put out a disclaimer and be very wary and careful of how I phrase things. I don't want you going into the whole realm of Egyptian and Egyptology, so-called Egyptology, without realizing I'm referring to the practice of preparation solely, not getting caught up in their worship and their multi-gods or idols and things. They using them as an example, just as a learning tool only, nothing more.
Just for sake of conversation.
Yeah, sort of. The heart is seen as a center of balance between volition, meaning what you intend to do, and what you have already done. And based on the two, if your heart carries with it the weight of guilt, then it will be heavier than the feather. And so yeah, I think you were thinking of Sobek. Sobek is not the one that would determine it. Supposedly Ma'at supposedly is the one that would determine the worthiness of, yeah, exactly, of one's passage through the test. And if you did not pass that test, then obviously then you would be devoured.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just asking. Because you were saying that
your heart in life, if you look to the heart in life as the center for, obviously the brain is considered, brain and its associated connections is considered your intent. Your intent has to come through a filter, and the heart is considered that filter, the processor of it. It's not the controller, but it can be the influencer. And through that filter, as it takes on with judgment delayed or deferred, all of the things that you do, which will end up all of the things that you have done. And as these things pass through, if there's no residue, then, meaning no guilt, no associated atrocity, or no associated pockmarks, then the heart is pure, it's clean. It's like a clean water filter that filtered pure water all the time, or with minimal sediment. The heart would be the filter. And then that filter will be looked at and weighed based on how much sediment it has caught. And the sediment would be the intent and the guilt associated with that intent. So your deeds and the intent behind those deeds has a residue. And if there is guilt regarding those deeds, it will show in what you've done. Even if you don't display guilt, even if you claim you don't feel guilt, even if you sleep like a baby at night, it still shows. That's what it's claiming. You
so
cannot.
it's stored there. So it's like stored there.
Yeah, it's stored there. So the heart, as we said, judgment deferred. When is it deferred? It's deferred upon the time of judgment.
And I remember you saying that the pineal is like the heart eye.
It is not necessarily an eye, but it is, again, another type of filter.
Because I mean, from what I just, my common observation of the body, it looks to me that the central nervous system is the template, or the core of the body in a sense, and it is basically the sperm cell that impregnated your mom. And like I from what I read is that the egg produces the tissue, so it looks like the tissue over top is coming from the egg, but the template itself of the structure is the seed, and the brain is basically the seed, and then your reproductive organs would be the fruit. So it's kind of like
You start out as a mass, and that mass unfolds. And so if you're looking at the mass, the code and the pattern, or code or pattern, come from the light bearer, that would be the father, and that pattern is embedded into, these are both seeds, and then it is embedded, and what you see is the transformation of the mass based on the pattern, and the pattern determines the various functions of the so-called parts. So the mass is all the same. In other words, your teeth are no different than your skin. It comes from the same, if you look at the gum and the teeth are the same. They're just, the pattern tells it to alter a particular material or unit so that it becomes this, becomes enamel, it becomes either bone, but the bone goes into the soft tissue, and it's not something alien, it's the same mass. It all develops from the same mass. It unfolds from a mass. It unfurls.
There's no separation, so it's like your eyes are skin.
Your
Everything is
eyes,
kind of like,
yeah, that's why there's this connection. And then hence the reason why you should know these connections. Hence the reason why it should not be a big so-called mystery. Why your schools and your education and your religions and everything else has been teaching you and or indoctrinating you to not see the natural connection between everything that is you. You cannot separate these things. All true, all you. When you do that, it's not a shock, and you're able to repair. You're able to know and comprehend without any confusion, because you know it all comes from one mass. You look at an egg, and if you were to crack open an egg and you see it's just one mass, but that same one mass, after a while, if you're allowed to, incubate, it will turn into what, a chickling or whatever, a duckling, with all so-called separate parts all working together in a hierarchy. And that hierarchy is a representation of the hierarchy that exists outside of us. We have a hierarchy within, we have a hierarchy that exists outside of us. And you can disrespect it or respect it, but there is a hierarchy that exists, and it's part of this place. It's part of us. It's in us. It's reflected in us. Some of us have it in us deeper, and so we can see the law of it all without having to try hard or use enhancements to see it and know it. Others ignore it. Most ignore it deliberately. Others fight it because they know it.
so in an environment where people don't really have matchmakers. I mean, everybody could go to you, I guess, but how do people look for a matchmaker? And if they can't find a matchmaker, how do they find like what? How do they know what to look for in the opposite sex? Like you were saying, like in this supposed culture, you got the Aboriginal woman is being placed or superimposed over top of the Aboriginal male. So how can she pick, or how does she know if it's a bunch of destitute or afflicted people? Because like how could you even like create a family or a nation if the people are afflicted in this way? Like how do like where do you know like somebody has the potential to work with them so that you can get through those things if they are suffering in those ways, or do you just automatically, it just has to be somebody that's already established like in some level? But I don't know how that could be. If they're established in the empires, it's probably going to be something insidious going on.
Start with yourself before you start looking outside for for a mate. And you ask yourself, are you prepared and ready? You'll know when you are. It's not based on arrogance. You know when you are. Then sometimes or often you have to move from where you are, because you are not going to encounter the mate, the complementary sex, as opposed to the opposite sex. You're not going to encounter it where you are. You have to be accepting of that, or mature enough to realize it and know what to do. But you don't just up and run, and you don't up and leave. None of that. You are wise in everything, including how you move, how you go from one place to another. So you should have looked into what is in the destinations before you go there, before you get there. And of course, your focused thought is to connect and commune, reconcile with originator creator, always for that assistance and guidance and protection before you get to where you're going. In total humility or humbleness. And that's one thing that is lacking in so many: humbleness. We are to be humble, and there's too much haughtiness in most. Hence the reason you'll be blocked from anything, because you're blocking yourself out of your own haughtiness, your own arrogance, to
Like a
see
fail safe.
to see that you have to progress you have to undo in order to be worthy of consideration.
So I guess I go through the questions of other people. People always ask me if this is a simulation, and what if this is a simulation? What is it? Where is the original state of consciousness, or like, where is the simulation being projected from? I guess I should say.
Okay, I am. Pardon that. My the yoga ball that I was using while I sat here. The air is coming out of it. I don't know. I think I punctured it. So that's my seat. So when the air is gone, I'll probably have to stop because I have no place to sit where I'm at.
Okay.
So I'll answer this question in regards to this reality. This reality that you are sensing is intertwined with your senses, and I'm not stealing a title, but it has been used before. This realm of senses is necessary in order for all of us to progress or to move forward, or as the case may be, backward. Without this realm of senses, we are in a stasis mode. You sense the stasis mode if you black out, or if you go into what is called a non-lucid coma. You sense that stasis mode. That stasis mode, if you are in it in both the physical and the ethereal, you literally stand still in so-called time. Some claim that that is used by advanced beings. Some claim that that was used when on Enoch, so-called Enoch or Shinnok, in order to, and on Elijah, supposedly in order to have them stay within time, but not within time, but at the same time still be sentient realm-based beings, because in our current status, we only have access to non-stasis and stasis within the dream mode. And in the dream mode, we're still in the physical, so-called physical reality. Therefore, this is not a simulation. This is a reality of worlds. Worlds are made, as I said before, to be destroyed and to be built. They're not, what is the word? They're not static.
It's not like if you go to like if you turn on a video game, this one person is there. This one place in the video game is just there. I guess that's like static. It's like something that's just
Exactly.
superimposed. Yeah.
The only thing that would be static, and this is something that everyone should take note of, you start to notice these things as you traverse this place, this reality. You'll run across things that appear to be the same. If you start doing this in your dreams, that helps you too, that empowers you, but you'll start to notice things that constantly appear. When you have encounters with other so-called people, many of those encounters are the same. This also might reflect on the person who asked about deja vu. These are teaching modalities or teaching methods. Because you've encountered a particular situation or scenario, that's some training for you. You should know how to handle it the next time you encounter a similar scenario. But moreover, you should also see that these things are reoccurring. And using your example of a video game, you have recurring what? The backdrops change, sort of, but there are recurring figments. The only thing that changes is you and the so-called backdrop. But do you really change? And does the backdrop really change? Things are added to it as you go from level to level, or so-called reality to reality, or if you want to call it simulation to simulation.
Yeah, because I mean, in video games, it's pretty much a stationary figure, and then the background is just like moved around. It's not like
It's not
ever.
really going anywhere. It's not really, there really is no motion. It's all an optical illusion, an effect. But there are things that are staples in each realm. Usually those things that are staples in each realm. Remember, video games are nothing more than the mindset and the manifestation of what we are talking about. This is where people get things from. We use things as fodder for our efforts and for our creations. Like the computer is a creation that's it manifests itself based on the inner workings of the so-called human brain. It's not something that just manifested out of imagination. But when you think of a so-called video game and the characters that are in it, these you could consider spirit forms that don't go to higher levels. But there's something that's the same about all of them.
This is the spirit-bound people you're speaking of.
Yeah, and that would be parasites. Parasites can transit to next levels, but they can't go to the distance, whatever that distance is, that the soul can go. Spirit forms are like video game characters. You see different, whatever, soldiers or monsters on different levels, but they're still the same monster. They might have different abilities, supposedly, but they're still the same thing. If you notice their movements and their ways, you can defeat them every time because it's no different than before. You just get caught up in the trappings of the surroundings and you think they're different. You get caught up in the so-called journey and don't realize that it's the same journey and the same things that you are encountering are occurring again. When you look at
That,
your day and the mess that you go through in a day, whether it be people in the street or coworkers, or family members even, you're encountering the same stuff. Certain things change, but it's not. And the effects are the same.
so like at a time when everything was in order and there was harmony on Earth, I mean I'd imagine that things were even more vibrant than a video game. Like if you look at things like they got in eastern Arizona, they got the petrified forest. So those
Mhm.
were so those were crystal trees, right? Like the whole area had to be have all these crystal trees, and I would assume that having trees like that or trees of that magnitude would create an environment that just housed a certain kind of consciousness. And I guess that's what the autonomous zone was or had, that area you were saying, I guess from like Utah to Sedona is an area that had a bunch of beings, whether they were in tree form or bug form or whatever, all these different forms of beings, human form. They were just reminders of self that were in harmony, reminders of order too, I guess. And I guess so when the parasite comes into control, it just has to wipe everything out, and because everything that is a reminder, it will I guess will stimulate some type of flourishing of the truth, and they don't want any of that. And I would assume that as far as there being levels, if you or periods of time or however you look at it, if a parasite hijacks you, then is it able to go into that part of your memory bank? Because it seems like the parasite is just constantly trying to delete the memories. So is it able to go into that phase in a passive sense and look back at that time to try to
I
block it
wouldn't,
out?
I wouldn't say delete any kind of memory because think about it in terms of our technology. Uh, can you really delete too much of anything? Not really. You can confuse, discombobulate. Even on a degausser, you can only move little bits of metal around so that the address is missing, but you're not really getting rid of anything. Obviously, that would be a contradiction if you could. According to so-called science of entropy, you cannot get rid of so-called energy. And is not your memory an example of energy? with intellect and purpose.
And I guess you
But
can't destroy what you didn't create.
right. And so the only thing that is occurring with Parasite is no different. That's why I use the example of a video game. Those little characters you meet along the way. I don't play games, but I'm just using what I guess from what people do in those games and the things that I've heard. I think was it Minecraft is one that I've heard about,
I
and
never
I've
played it.
actually seen someone play a game where a guy's walking down, it looks like the streets of Los Angeles, and he's running and walking and running and walking. There's cars and people are talking, but he looks like he's going nowhere, but he's encountering different beings along the way. He'll stop, he'll try to get a car or whatever. He'll go to a different level, but the only thing that changes is the scenery, but the scenery doesn't really change. That's all part of this whole plane. It's not really changing, nor do those characters that he meets along the way. They become parasitic when you become stagnated in them, with them, or in you.
So
Otherwise,
I was gonna say, so the parasites that are kind of like wolves in sheep's clothing. You see a lot of people now going from raw vegan into raw meat now. What was it? Were they always parasites to begin with, or what?
raw eating, so-called raw eating, that's not new. That, again, like the scenery in the game, it's not new. Nothing is new. And I think there's even a saying, nothing is new under the sun or something like that.
Yeah.
But there's nothing new in that regard. But if you see it as new, you can get caught up in that too, and that can become stagnating. That wow effect. You shouldn't be wowed by too much of anything in this place. You should look at it collectively and calmly and realize, okay, what am I to do now? What is my next step? But
I mean,
calmly.
people ask me why it's happening, and I don't know anybody that I could ask but you, because I don't know. I have no desire in me to go in that direction, and I can't speak for everybody though.
Yeah, I mean, it's for those who are caught up in that, who think that that has some type of solution for their well-being. But if you use true logic, you realize, A, to eat the blood and flesh of any live creature would be to go against your nature. And why? Because you're not a creature that eats and captures live flesh. You can hunt it, but you subdue it, and then you have to prepare it so that you can consume it. Even a so-called god wants it prepared so that it can inhale the smoke of the flesh. It doesn't want to eat it as a low-level beast, consuming sinew, fur, and blood and bone and gristle. No. Therefore, if you're doing that, even if you're just eating the so-called lean and the muscle tissue, or fascia rather, you're still violating self, regardless of what you are. Obviously, in the format they're in, they look like people, but are they parasites? Possibly, because you need a marketing team, and a marketing team usually has to have something that the group, or either a way to make the group or the masses identify with the desire to have the product. So you'll have people who will look like you or who claim to be vegan who are now doing some strange thing. And that is marketing. And
So these people that are parasites usually don't know that they're parasites, that they're in a loop, right?
it
The host
depends.
the
Usually
host
people
doesn't know.
they'll come to, during their lifetime, they'll come to a conclusion after a while. Others will bring it to their attention who are parasites, and they'll know. Usually they know.
Yeah, I've heard people say that. I mean, I think that's generally when I talk to people that live out here where I live, that are carnists, if you want to call them that. They all look at it like, yeah, humans are a scourge on the earth. They're all parasites, and I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right if you're speaking for yourself. I guess
Hmm.
you're not wrong.
Exactly. They eventually, if they are in the dark, or pardon me, if they're in the light, because they will be blinded by limelight, if they're in that light, they eventually come to the conclusion, or someone brings them to task and says, okay, listen, this is what you are, and I can prove it, and here's your family line. They usually realize that. They're brought around because they have to deal in certain circles.
So everybody gets exposed to the truth at some point in the path.
Yeah, it's up to you to realize it and then know what to do and act accordingly. You
So,
don't just sit and breathe.
so a lot of the parasite is associated with the false identification, or all of it, I guess, is just an identity theft situation. So I know you were saying like nobody can give you sovereignty but yourself. But I don't know if you can talk about it another time, or people can just come to you privately.
Well,
Where can people get information on the recension process?
well, we can do that next week. There's no need to be paying anyone for that, because it's something that you have to take it upon yourself and do. Remember, I said this is not a sit and breathe. You literally must do. This is time to act and do. And rescinding of things and proclamation of things, as far as emancipating, is a step and a process, or steps and a process that you must take and must do. So now it's time to put your knowledge that you've gained to use in active form. I think there's a question, because the gentleman's been waiting. You want to take his question first?
Thank you guys for letting me on again. And what you were talking about is directly correlated to my question. When you're finding yourself fasting and realizing that your whole life has been a parasite, and you're finally sober, it's like, what? And your family, you want to save them, and it's like scary. Just, if you could speak on that, please, because like I fasted and I got sober and I realized I want to save people, but like I know you can't without saving yourself first. And now, like you said, it's time to act. So it's kind of a, thank you. If you could speak on that.
Okay. One of the things you must keep in mind when it comes to so-called family and your connections, bloodline connections, birth connections, pardon that term, is that can be stagnating as well. It is also, you can call it the trick and the treat. Many people are caught in the trick of connection, familial connection, and therefore they stay bound by it. That's how you continue to have all the ills of the world. They feel bound and obligated to that, not realizing you must separate yourself from parasitic activity, regardless
Yes.
of how it is in your life, whether it comes in the form of your family, your school, your country, your race, whatever. You must separate yourself from that and not continue in it and work against it. That is how. So when it comes to maybe in endearing and edifying those you feel a connection with, that's great. You should do that, but then you have to stop, because you are respectful of the fact that these are separate souls on their journey as well. And therefore you respect the fact these are not children. If they were your children, then I would not be saying this. Your children, you are obligated to a degree up until the point where they are when they are of self-volition. But those are not your children, unless you're talking about nieces and nephews, and even then, they're not your children. They are the rightful ward of your siblings. You can influence, you can suggest, and you can exemplify primarily in order to help make progress available to them. Progress is not change. Change happens inevitably. But in order to make progress available to them, they have to see that it's happening in you, that they see it happening with you. And those that are not completely lost in that regard, they'll take the steps And the first step will be talking to you. That's usually what occurs. And that's where you are to be ready to not so much answer questions, but ask questions. That's the best way to get someone ready for progress when they're reaching out. Ask questions. I want to start doing that with many of you when you start asking questions. I want to take that time to start asking you questions and then seeing what you're doing and how you're doing it with regards to, let's say, your question, how you are making progress seen, how you're making it appear tangible to those you want to influence, not save. You're not a savior to any of them. None of us are saviors to anyone. We can influence and suggest and exemplify, but we're not there to save, because saving means to take on a responsibility that will deflect or divert or defer what's going to happen to someone. And I've always said, and it's been said before, no one can take a spiritual bullet or a soul bullet for someone else. What's going to occur with you, for you, in the worlds to come is to occur with and for you only. The things that you've done, you're responsible for. No one else is responsible for. That's where, you can tell these religions are off and misleading. Therefore, get out of the mindset of trying to save, because that will stagnate you. That's also part of one of the traps. It'll misuse your empathy. I never allow your empathy to be misused. That's also part of as I said, one of the traps to misguide those who want to use so-called higher energy to help others. You hear that a lot. I want to help others. I want to help change this. I want to help do that. That is like waving, pardon, and this is not a metaphor, that's like putting blood in a shark tank. So-called higher energy is seen and it's seen as naivete, and it's a call to eat for parasites that like to eat that, and many like that. Even the inadvertent parasite that you find in people who are usually addicts. Those are the parasites that either haven't learned yet what they are, or they're not parasites, they're just being pimped by parasites. And so they will flock to that so-called higher energy, and that higher energy will want to help get them off their addictions and all the other things that people do to try to help. And in the meantime, both are being eaten alive. You would leave that up to those who are readily able to block that type of occurrence. And those aren't many, despite what you might have seen or read, and what we all have seen or read, in the form of counselors and priests and agencies and organizations. Those are all parasitic for the most part, even though many do have success rates in getting people off, but you notice they go to another addiction, whether it be a subtle addiction or a certain type of mindset, or just another addiction.
So somebody asked, I know this other gentleman got something to ask, but somebody asked in the questions, they said last time we talked there was a 7-day cycle of food that you mentioned briefly. Can you elaborate on it?
Okay. Yeah, 7 days is not when you should be eating. You should not be eating 7 days a week. Yeah.
Once in 7 days, I think you said?
Not once every 7 days, but over a period of separating 4 days over 7 days. So if you eat on a Monday, then you would eat on a Wednesday, and then so forth. And as long as it comes out to 4 days out of 7, and then the rest of those days would be, you could do liquid and rest, or liquid and re-energize, not rest, but liquid and re-energize over that period of time. And the foods that you eat would be highly nutritious in the sense of the world we're in today. If you would incorporate microgreens, that would be the best for whatever you're eating. Microgreens pretty much every day because they have the highest concentration of nutrients right now in our world.
It's the most real thing that's still alive.
So incorporate that with whatever you are eating on those 4 days, but not every 7 days, because literally many things take time to break down. And for those who are listening who still eat flesh, flesh takes upwards of double digits to break down in the
It
terms of
seems it seems like I don't know if you could what people call sleep to me. It seems like that's just the body trying to catch up on its breathing and allow the cells to breathe. It seems like sleep is just an unconscious breath work, or what people call sleep.
breathing in so-called breathing and or respiration is part of the process of re-energizing and cleansing. Although, we're not using the lungs to cleanse, we're using the apparatus to help bring the necessary oxygen to all the parts in order to cleanse. And when you are not doing anything in the sense of the physical, that's the best time to get that oxygen in there. That's why you so-called sleep. It's actually re-energizing. You're plugging in. Where are you plugging in? You're plugging into the creative source that is placed there for all life. You're not plugging into so-called God. You're plugging into the creative source that was created and manifested by the being that you call God or Haya, the one and only, the I am. That is how we all operate. You have to plug into that on a regular basis. If you are wise, you do so at a particular point in time, every single day.
So this is all about circulation. This is what you were saying that faith is, because you said faith on the periodic table is Fe. Iron on the periodic table is Fe, Fe, and that's what faith is in Latin or in Spanish at least. It's that's Fe. Santa Fe means like saint of faith. So and the blood is synonymous with iron, right? So
Well,
it,
the iron in the blood comes from the eternity in the body, the representation of so-called eternity in the so-called vessel, which is manifested in the osteo part of the blood, which comes from the so-called bone marrow. And that is what lasts and what leaches and what is eaten regarding transit entities. They go for that. When they talk about tales of um, so-called vampires. That's what they're ingesting. They're ingesting the iron and what comes with it. That would be all the portals. They're using you like a mushroom, basically, because when you bite into, and some tales have actually talked about that, where when the so-called parasite or vampire would bite into the victim, they would see the person's life and all the things associated. So in other words, you're biting into the portal of that universe, of that being, and so they're using like a mushroom. It's a rush, and it's also access into portals. So hence the reason why in these tales of Nosferatu and vampires, they have a control over the ones that they bite. And then they become like a hive. They can actually, control. The person cannot hurt them. They cannot harm them because that's their master, their maker. And people call God their maker. So if you look at these tales, these beings, whether inadvertently or directly, are giving you little hints and clues as to what's going on and what is.
so they're eating your faith, basically taking your faith.
They're taking your eternity because you're a portal, and they're taking all that is associated with it in your consciousness and then beyond. So they can go into your ancestry blood too, your transit blood.
All right, I'm done. I know that he has something to say, but yeah, I just hear the
Yeah,
truth.
that one might have been a little too much. Go ahead. There's someone there in the dark. What's your
Um,
name?
greetings, Pharaoh. Balance and wholeness vibrations to both you and Collage. I appreciate you holding space for truth and being a clear channel for us to tap into and learn from. My name is Lee, and the questions I have for you, I'm going to try to keep them as concise as possible. But how would you teach one to become consciously aware of their dreams and how to cultivate health as a male in this world that we live in, with things as they are in the state of being that we're currently residing in.
Okay, really quick. Dreams you take control of by and watching what you ingest. That's the basics. So that means what you put in the mouth, what goes in the nose, what goes through the eyes and the ears. That will be the start. When it comes to not so much cultivating, but when it comes to nourishing, nurturing the masculine go principle or energy of self, so that you can um, thrive, I guess, supposedly, or call it that, in this place as a masculine energy, not to, again, with what you ingest. You're not to ingest just anything and everything randomly. Know the things that are to work best within you and not add clutter to you, especially those that have a signature that is of a masculine nature. There are foods for males and there are foods for females. Foods that are for males sometimes or often have a signature that is masculine in look or appearance, gourds, cucumbers, things like that, bananas. So people would say, oh, okay, anything that's phallic shaped. No, not always, no.
Okay. So do you have
So,
like a template that you could, I mean, I know that everyone's bio-individual as far as their body goes, but what would you, if you were to give a template for someone to follow to become the most vibrant as possible, what would you advise?
there's really no template other than, as I mentioned before, reconciliation and seeking counsel with originator creator. That is the utmost. And you do that by not doing the things that you have been accustomed to doing and questioning all of these things before indulging and the people that you are around. That's the start. There's really no template. And then you'll start to become clear and you seek wisdom in the things that you study, and you don't settle for what you see, regardless of what it is. You continue to question and ask and question and ask. You do less and you remain humble. So that means on all levels. That includes what you put in the mouth, what you eat. You do less, you eat less, but you magnify and optimize what goes in so that you don't become, let's say, addicted to the thought process that less means weak or less is less. That happens a lot. People start to consume less and they think because of the programming that they are less or that they must do things to compensate for that. If you're doing it correctly and accurately and humbly, you'll see the difference in your life. You'll see the optimization of, if you will, of your life. It won't be abstract. It will manifest itself in your physical format. You'll see yourself get maybe smaller, but you won't be wasting, and you must make sure that that is not occurring.
And if so, how does one counter that if
If
that
you are
is?
if you are sensing and experiencing wasting, then that means you have obviously done all things incorrectly. Start with, as I mentioned before, the ethereal. And that means before you start getting into the physical, you're focusing in on the thought and you want to call it that prayer, focused thought first. And this will help you to see, okay, my life is not what it should be because I'm around the wrong people. I'm doing the things that I should not be doing. I'm continuing the same patterns, and I'm just increasing those vices. And I'm also participating in the same things. They're just different names, or it seems like it's different, but it's all the same, and it's for vain purposes. That will tell you right there, when you take those steps into the physical, like food, you're going to be going in the wrong directions, and it will manifest itself in things like muscle wasting, in joint pain, in deficiencies, and also in what is that? When you start to eat off of the eyes and the kidneys, things of that nature, taking from your soft tissue. If that starts to occur, you didn't start off correctly. That's what most
That's why.
people don't do. They go off in the wrong direction. They do not start in the correct, precise manner. Start
that-
there first, then proceed.
That's why you were saying that, like what we were saying earlier, that it's like it's a holistic approach. Like if you don't want to try to do the wrong things the right way. Like if you're living a life where you're still trying to have a job and a boss and have certain things while you fast and stuff like that, it's gonna be counterproductive because you're doing it for all the wrong reasons. Like you're trying to advance in the wrong direction, so it's gonna leach, I guess, from you. But if your life is in alignment, if you're in alignment with yourself, and then like your activities are in alignment with yourself, and you're not doing things out of vanity. Like if you're not working out just for vanity, if you're working out just to circulate in your body and to just keep things keep everything circulated, is different than if you're working out of vanity. Because vanity really, it would be just mainly, it's a lot of it is fear, right? It's pride, right? That's a lot of this is pretty much just fear, like for the
It's
wrong
all,
reason, instead
it's
of
all
fearing God.
it's all those things that you want to place in the blanks: fear, vanity, arrogance. It's all of that. You start off and there's only the correct way. I didn't say right way, one way. I said there's the correct way. And what's the opposite of that? The wrong way. And the correct way is you start off with your focus only on creator originator and seeking wisdom. The wisdom will show you that why would you want to start doing certain things like changing your eating patterns if your life patterns are the same. You are all connected. You are all one mass, and you're not going to separate that mass from the activities or the thought patterns. You will get repeat behavior in a different form down the road.
It's a package deal.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then my next question that I guess stems from the response that I got is, like you said, the next live you guys do will be in the recension process, or the claiming of your own power through proper knowledge and education of self.
Well,
But
sovereignty, I think, is a misused word because you're not going to claim sovereignty in an empire. To claim sovereignty in an empire, there's certain factors. It's actually a term, a legit legal term. And if you are to claim sovereign or sovereignty, that means you are a part of the empire, but you are sanctioned or designated as a particular untouchable or off limits or do not engage type personality or persona, a denizen that has particular rights. If that's what you want to be, then you have to qualify for that. And sovereigns have certain levels of, let's say, commerce or commercial status that I don't know if you can even achieve. So why would you want sovereignty? You don't want sovereignty. You want
I,
autonomy.
yeah, autonomy would be the correct term. I guess what I meant to iterate was that to be self-sufficient in every sense of the word, as you are in control of your life and you're not outsourcing your personal power or what have you in any other direction other than what way you would like to direct your life, if that makes sense.
Does it make sense to you? When you speak, your words should automatically make sense. You want to refrain from asking the listener, does that make sense? You want to make sure that it makes sense before you speak it. It's no different than you give me some food and what you care about. Does it taste good or is it nutritious for me? You should know that it's nutritious before you feed it to me. And I, as a listener, must take steps to be responsible as a listener before I receive it, before I take it on. I should either ask you, well, what is this? Is that a question? If it's not a question, then I
I,
probably am not going to lead it. I'm not going to answer it. So it's the same thing what you just said there. Does it make sense? Well, in that regard, it doesn't really make sense because you want to seek self-sufficiency in a world or an empire where self-sufficiency is based on reliance. First, reliance on self, but then you have that reliance on others. That you get only in a community format.
okay, I understand.
So you're seeking self-reliance and or reliance on communal reliance and autonomy. That should be what you're seeking to do and what you're working towards. But self-sufficiency or just being sufficient is something that you should be apprised of when you are a child and should have been taught to you by your father, if your father was around, your uncles, your male cousins. They teach you these things of sufficiency so that in the family unit or the unit you call family, you are worthy of being a member in that family. So it's the same in a community. You are worthy of being part of that community because you are sufficient in the things that you do and know. You are there to, like everyone is there to serve everyone. So everyone gets served because they are sufficient and they rely on one another in a communal form. No one is left out. That's something
Right.
you should be working towards right now and should have been working towards before. Your sufficiency in what do you know how to do? What are the things that you consider attributes that you've learned? Those are the things you are sufficient in. Some might say efficient in, but sufficient, efficient, that you can get the job done and do it right.
Okay. And one more to expand upon the first question I asked you. So you say that there's a correct way to do things. When you say, what is the correct way to fast or begin the re-energizing process of your soul vessel?
Well, those are two separate areas or two different areas, not separate, but two different areas you're talking about, fasting and re-energizing. You re-energize every time you do the so-called sleep or nap. That's a re-energizing. So um, you can talk to me later about that. But as far as fasting, remember, fasting means doing nothing, eating nothing. So start there. That would be the correct way of doing a fast. And if you think that just doing a fast right now or tomorrow in the afternoon at 3 o'clock is considered cold turkey, and for those who don't know what that means stopping or starting something without preparation. If that's what that means to you, then that could be considered mental trauma, therefore you shouldn't do it. But if you have prepared for that, where you are able to start without the so-called programming of trauma, meaning you have total control over a vessel, then yeah, you can fast and do nothing and do it for a particular time and then restart. Same way. However, there is a progression and you can stick to the progression, and the progression should be where you're following the order of things. And I went over this before, I'll go over it again. There's an order. You go from the ethereal to like how you got here. You didn't just get here in the physical. Someone had to think about you.
Right.
So thought comes first. Then comes the things that go next. And then we get into the physical. So if it's a fast, it's the thought, because you want to get that cleansed too. Then it goes from there into the physical realm. So if we're talking about the levels of physical and we're speaking in terms of sustenance, then we want to we want to progress from what we normally do, what most people normally do, which is solids, and progress out of that into less solids, and then keep progressing out of that into liquids, and then so on and so forth. And then continue like a geometric shape into thought again. So by the time you get to the culmination of a fast, you're back into thought as the last thing you do. So you go from maybe the fasting and the nothing and not thinking, not reading, not watching TV, literally just fast, total cleanse. And then when you're ready to come out of that, you proceed from there into thought, prayer, communing. You cannot be afraid of communing with the creator, originator. And then go from there, be humble, ask questions. And go from there into what's next in the physical realm, breathing. And then from the breathing into what's next, because that's a gas, okay? And then go from there into breathing in light. And then from breathing in light, depending on your melanin, and then go from there into some liquid, go from there into some solids, and so on and so forth. There you have it.
Thank you so much for your time and holding this space.
So I don't know when we're gonna do another one of these, but people had asked me about the last one, it not being up and everything, and I guess we'll just rehash over some of the things another time from the first one, I guess.
Okay, that sounds about right. And let's see, there's one person in there. I don't know who it is. If one of you wants to be a kind and subtract yourself from the scene. Okay, I'll let this other person in. Did we get to your question?
Mine?
Yes.
Yes, we did. Thank you so much. I had
Okay.
one thing, but you answered it. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. So I'll go to this last person and then we both have to go. Okay, here we go. I don't know who this is. I don't know. Okay. Someone there? I just see darkness.
I think they're there though. They gotta be there.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Pharoh. Thank you, Taylor Budd. My name is Bright. I'm from Ghana, and I wanted to ask about hearing that we weren't designed naturally to be having children. So I wanted to ask that how should a person cultivate himself if this is true, and what should be the driving force behind every person's actions, and how should we generally aim ourselves if we're not supposed to be fragmenting ourselves into children over and over again into this cycle that we find ourselves in, please. Thank you.
Okay. That is a very pregnant question, no pun intended. There's a lot in there. I'll have to condense it, if you don't mind, to the speaker.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Thank you.
You mentioned first that if we are designed and destined for creation or being co-creators or procreating in this realm, in this existence, we are designed for that. We have the capability to do that when all circumstances are correct, even in the light of malfeasance or error or folly of ancestry, because people make egregious mistakes and errors and deliberate haughty actions which can cause someone to become infertile or cause someone to be bearers of bad seed, if you will. But In order to, I don't use the word cultivate if you haven't noticed already, I say nourish. And in nourishing the seed within, you do that from the time you are aware. And this is something that your guides, aka parents, are to teach you. But most don't know this. So therefore you're learning to do this now, possibly. Nourishing of the seed within is just what it says in every manner, like I mentioned to the gentleman earlier about the level or hierarchy of fasting. Well, there's a hierarchy of nourishing, and you do that too. So by the time you get to the lower level of the nourishment, you're now talking about the food, the things that you can see and sense. Then you're nourishing in that regard. So you're doing it precisely and accurately and carefully, or with care, every day. The closer you get to the time that you are going to now procreate with someone. So you have been working towards it. This is not something that, okay, I get married and I found someone and now 6 weeks later we're going to start doing this process. No, you are doing your fatherhood process and they're doing their motherhood process when you were in your formative years. And so you were thinking of all the things as opposed to all the distractions that the parasites have you into. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I want to buy a video game, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be rich, I'm going to do this to this girl, I'm going to do this, I'm going to go here, I'm going to be, that's all lovely, but you're supposed to put away the foolish toys long ago, if had them at all. You are to be thinking of, this is what my people need, this is what is necessary, this is what I'm going to manifest. I'm going to manifest 7 sons. I'm going to manifest 4 sons, 4 daughters. 2 of those sons will be healers, shaman. 1 will be teacher. 2 of my daughters will be guides and teachers. 1 will be mother and teacher. I'm making all these things up as I go, as I speak to you, but you get the idea. And so you're thinking all these things, and so is she. And when you get together, you talk, you question, as you are courting. And then when it comes time to become actual mates, marriage, then you now have accordance, meeting of the minds, like they do in contracts, which so-called marriage is a contract. And therefore you are now ready to proceed, pun intended. And you plan for it as you have been planning all along. And you set it forth according to timing. And then by that hour, you're ready for it. You have been eating correctly. It's no different than a fast. You're ready for it. People have been making fecal babies for the longest in this realm. Literally. Literally. Fornicating and full of fecal matter. Unclean. And you get what you get when you do these things. This is the world we see. And you expect this and you expect that. You get high expectations for fecal matter.
Is the parasite already in the being that's coming in if you're a parasite, or are you trapping some being and then giving them a parasite?
All of the above, and you don't have to do that. You don't want to do that, especially of aboriginal nature. We're not supposed to do that. We are supposed to be the guides, the judges, and teachers of this plane. So we have a higher obligation to not be living as all those other levels. And they look to us, but we are living in the wrong light, in the wrong level. We are to plan everything, and especially the bringing in, the ushering in of life forms, of new life. We are to bring in their arrival before we even start the process of conceiving. That's why I said people plan a cake better and more so than they plan the arrival of this new life. There shouldn't be any accidents, and there won't be when you are on the correct level and you are practicing the hierarchy and you are in respect of the law. There's no such thing as an accident. There's no such thing as an abortion. It doesn't exist. It's not even in the mind frame. The world progresses when we start taking these things appropriately, correctly, and not living outside of ourselves and violating ourselves. We're not decomposers. We're not scavengers. We're not supposed to be living this way. Despite our levels of hierarchy, despite recessive, despite dominant, we are all in the sense of an obligation to creator, originator, and to this plane that we're in. So we all have a responsibility, and we all know better. There's no, oh, I come from a tribe and I don't know better. No, we all know better. That's why parasites thrive. That's why, and I said before, I don't know of any wealthy person that's not a parasite. If they do, please step forward. So that's why parasite and wicked thrive, get what they want, get it done fast, and you can't fault them for it. You have to look at them and be kind of like respectful. You can learn from them in the sense of how they work together. They definitely don't have affinity for one another, but they work together to make sure their hosts, their population of hosts, stay around.
Instead of moving on to another experience and having...
Because they know, they can see the big picture, and that's what matters most. They have a prime directive and they stick to it.
So how does one begin to find that their prime
Say that
directive?
again?
How does one begin to find their prime directive or their righteous direction?
Well, it's not yours, it's not mine. We already know what it is. It's the opposite of what goes on with parasite host setup. Do you want to continue being the host? Do you want to continue being food? So we know that that's part of the prime directive, not to be food anymore.
And it's like you said, cycles aren't your friend. And again, like you said about wealthy people and money, man, like money is associated with the moon, right? Moony money. And everything I see as far as parasites, as far as people, it's all happening on a moon cycle. Everything's being regulated by the moon end of it more so than the solar cycle. It seems like on full moons, the freaks come out and they do dumb stuff. The parasites fully manifest, I guess. I guess they plant their seeds during the new moon, and then they come around for harvest time around that full moon, I guess. And most people are kind of on a lunar scheduling system, it seems like, with the parasite. And I guess that's like, and same thing with the money too. The money is all like 1st and the 15th. It's all like every 14 days or 13 days, kind of like just like the moon.
Correct. And we are not, the only thing that the so-called lunar cycle is part of, it's not putting down or relegating the lunar cycle or moon, whatever you want to call it. It's not putting it down or discounting it. It plays a part in the role of timing. We see it in the cycles of planting. So it plays a part in this realm. So in the sense of procreation, we are not to procreate according to the moon. We are to procreate according to the go principle. The go principle being the masculine principle. Therefore, we are to procreate at the rise of the sun. That's when the erection occurs. And yet people are procreating according to the parasite programming, at night, after the Tonight Show, after Arsenio Hall, after the news, after dinner. After dinner, you're full of,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
No, I mean, I guess you need a decomposer at some level. Something has to compost what is dying or killing itself.
That's part of this place. You have to be accepting of that as well. I mentioned that before. We don't want to look at the ugliness of so-called nature. Without the decomposition, you want to see what happens without that? yeah, we need the decomposers, but we are not the decomposers. Everything has its place.
Yeah.
And I respect the decomposers. We all respect them. We should. We respect the scavengers, but we are not them. We all have our place in this realm, in the physical realm. Without them, we don't exist. So I mentioned this to you in private before. I said, in our level of so-called people, it's like a man being jealous of a woman because he can't carry a baby to term inside of his body. Like, you need to, that shouldn't even be a factor in your existence. It just is that she can and you cannot. There's nothing to get over. There's nothing to be jealous of. You each have your purpose in this realm, and you're respectful of that purpose. There's no jealousy involved because it has nothing to do with jealousy. You're respectful of your purpose and your function. And so is she. You know, she cannot put life into something. That's not her purpose. She doesn't contain that force. So there's no jealousy. However, in this time that we are in, where the parasite is thriving, they're confusing that. Probably won't be. There will be a time, probably, because we are not doing what we're supposed to, in the sense of separating ourselves out of these systems. We will see possibly some type of technology or machine, if not an actual sentient being that was not born true female, carrying a baby inside of its sack that might be, you know, like a sack built into a male. Who knows? This is the whole purpose of parasitism, to confuse. Confusion creates a spiral that is a continuing form of a portal. It's not a true portal, but it's the same thing. And if you look at a so-called DNA spiral or helix, think of it like that. And the further it carries so-called humanity down that spiral, the further lost it gets. You cannot find your way out of it. Confusion is that within. When you are confused within, you don't know how to come out of that. That's why I say sobriety is very crucial. You don't play around with things that make you intoxicated. Sobriety is a must.
Yeah, I remember this one quote, and it was saying that fear causes hesitation, and hesitation makes your worst fears come true. And I guess the confusion would cause the fear, and you know, if you're not sober, you're more likely to succumb to fear. And I mean, to me, I feel like it's all kind of fear, man. Anger and all of that is just kind of different shades of fear.
Those are called what? Emotions, right? And emotions can be traced to biochemical reactions, hormonal reactions, primarily those that have the strongest effect on either stopping or inhibiting the functions of those organs or organelles that release the hormones that create creativity and create action and logic. So you are increasing, for example, cortisol, which is going to increase more cortisol and push adrenaline into hyper mode. You are then stopping the functions that are necessary. One of the basic functions or basal functions is to rid the body of toxins. So you're now stopping that part.
And this is happening while people are dreaming and having these stressful dreams. Because they, like you always used to say, food is like a roofie.
Yeah, exactly. It's the perfect roofie.
So you get knocked out, and then you get F'd by the parasite while you release all this adrenaline and cortisone.
That's what I said before. Keep in mind we are portals, and as such, as being, you know, semi-permeable, you can be misused in ways you cannot even fathom. And this happens on a nightly basis, or, you know, regular basis, to most beings, to most people.
Okay, so just to add, with you, Pharoah, talking about the interdependence of us and the community, and how should we correctly build the network of connections between us and the general system in order to allow the correct room for these parasites to be able to operate, please? If operational purpose, what room should we allow them within this network, please?
Well, you, in your frame of community, there are no parasites, although infiltration, you you can sometimes expect, but you are planned for it and planning for it on a nonstop basis. No different than your vessel is planned and planning for potential invasions from adaptogens, pathogens, whatever that exists on you, outside you. You are prepared for it. In the sense of a community operating within an empire structure, you are not the only community. There are other communities. That's the whole purpose of setting up communities. So inside of an infrastructural empire, you have set up an autonomous zone. That's nothing new. The autonomous zones have existed before, and they will obviously exist again in this realm. The purpose, though, is to become larger than the parasitic minority, which has the illusion of majority. And when you are that strong as a community or series of communities, the parasite structure collapses automatically. It forfeits. That's just the way it works. Inside yourself, it acts the same way.
I feel like as soon as I identify, like in my experiences, when I would identify something that is not myself, I go right into a fever or a sweat. Like my body goes right into burning.
Well, then you've set yourself up to have an alert system. You should definitely enhance that in the sense of nourish it so that it becomes stronger, and then find out what other things that you can do insofar as alerting yourself or acting as a guard, using your senses to act as a guard to protect yourself and protect others. In the sense of a community, how to know who to be part of your community, you know, in the sense of one, their works and what they can offer your community, the community, and that is so important. You want everyone to be part of it, and in order to be part of it, you have to participate in it with your knowledge, with your hands. That's crucial. And you put people through a test. Everyone is put through a test on a constant basis in any community to make sure that they are worthy, that they haven't been breached. We're not at a point in time, and I don't think we'll ever be, nor have we ever been, at a point where we can sit and relax on our laurels. Collage talks about the time of harmony. Even in a so-called time of harmony, you still are vigilant.
Even more so, probably. I mean, I don't even know if any more so, but still, like it's almost more, uh, I guess, important because you got even more to lose.
That, and you realize it's not about adversarial anything. It's not about struggle or fight. It's about realization of where you are. We are in a place that's built to have instability to a degree. Some call it yin yang, some call it positive negative, some call it polar. That's the way this place is built in order for it to exist. But you can go in the wrong direction or in the one direction too far. It's no different than if you're comparing alkalinity to acidity. You can go too far in either direction, or you can have that balance. You need to exist in the balance,
But
not
there's always
alkaline.
gonna,
Some say, oh, you need to be alkaline, or not in the acidic. We are to have both properties in that, but we have control over both properties. And therefore we have control over the parasite because that's the way of this place. The parasite is not meant to control. The parasite is meant to serve and stay within a realm and nothing more. You can now go into I talk in geometry and parable. Go back into what Collage was started with about the so-called garden and the tree. Well, the tree existed in a so-called garden, but the control was in the hands of those who were placed as stewards of the garden. They gave in and gave up control, and they lost it. And that's a
so
full.
yeah. I'm about to say, yeah. That's. Thank you, Pharoh.
Mhm. All
Thank you.
right.
We
All right.
really thank you.
Well, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Adios.